if we refuse to comply with their extremist demands. The City of New York relies heavily on federal government funding, expertise, and partnerships across every facet of city operations. All New Yorkers are impacted, whether it's resources for your kid's school, a Section 8 voucher to keep your rent affordable, or the peace of mind knowing that you're protected from disease outbreaks and terrorist threats. Federal resources have been essential to keeping our city running and our people safe, but we can no longer depend on our federal partners. The city budget receives $9.7 billion in federal funds, over 8% of our city budget. But federal funding impacts are far broader. Public entities like NYCHA, CUNY, Health and Hospitals, the MTA rely on many billions of federal funding that's on the chopping block. Federal funding cuts and negligence have already impacted the most vital government programs like Social Security, and Republicans in Congress have made clear that Medicaid is a top target in their sights. Slashing $880 billion in Medicaid nationally would absolutely devastate the health care coverage and outcomes of low-income and older adults and put the future of safety net hospitals, nursing homes, and home health care agencies in jeopardy. As we appear likely to be entering an economic downturn caused directly by President Trump's chaotic policies, more and more New Yorkers will rely on all levels of government to stay afloat. And yet we have a mayor that has demonstrated he is unwilling to challenge the Trump administration and fight for New Yorkers. We've seen our governor, our attorney general, stand up and defend New Yorkers. Mayors and governors across the country are upholding their values and planning and preparing for the worst in their communities. But here in New York City, Mayor Adams has enthusiastically accommodated President Trump, and by extension, his disastrous policies. Now is the time for robust federal advocacy and rigorous contingency planning. We must engage with our New York delegation in Congress and mobilize city leaders to champion our needs. It will take competent management and strong leadership to navigate these challenges. We must build up our reserves and identify new opportunities for efficiencies and savings to weather this federal upheaval. At the same time, as the federal government retreats from its core responsibilities, the City of New York must step up. While we cannot fully cover the gaps created by federal government cuts, we need to make targeted investments to protect the health and safety of New Yorkers. This morning, alongside our speaker, Adrienne Adams, Chair Brannon and I released a plan to Trump-proof New York City by making critical investments to ensure the health and safety of New Yorkers by preventing measles outbreaks, ensuring preparedness from extreme weather events, and keeping New Yorkers safe from attacks. While the chaos in Washington deepens, the economic outlook worsens, and we prepare for the impact of budget reconciliation, we are committed to both expanding savings and reserves and Trump-proofing New York City with smart and necessary targeted investments. A budget is a moral document, and it has never been more urgent that our city budget reflect our values, to demonstrate that we refuse to bow down to the recklessness and bellicosity in Washington, and to prove to New Yorkers that they can trust us to protect them through this unprecedented moment. But today, no one from the Adams administration is here to answer our questions. The mayor once again has chosen to be silent while Donald Trump makes us less safe, destabilizes our economy, and deports our neighbors. The lack of planning and preparation by this administration for the impending tsunami of cuts is a complete dereliction of duty. These cuts will have a devastating impact on the lives of everyday New Yorkers, each of our constituents. And it's only getting worse. Again, unfortunately, it's becoming abundantly clear that this mayor is more loyal to Donald Trump than to the people of New York City. We also will be hearing a preconsidered introduction to address a technical error relating to employees' communications and adjudicative proceedings. With that, I'd like to thank the staff who prepared us for this hearing, Governmental Operations Committee Counsel, Jay Sriganapathy, Finance Committee staff, Julia Haramis and Brian Sarfo, and my amazing team led by Chief of Staff Molly Haley and Communications Director Neve Mooney. With that, I will turn it over. Well, I will just recognize Natasha Williams, council member from Queens. Did I miss anybody else? I did. And Althea Stevens is here from the Bronx. Thank you for being with us. And with that, I will turn it over to my friend, Chair Brannon.
Thank you, Chair Ressler, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Oversight hearing on how New York City is preparing or failing to prepare for a fiscal assault from Donald Trump and his so-called Department of Government Expenditures, or DOGE. Before we begin, let me say this. It's an absolute disgrace that the administration chose to refuse to show up today. We were told late last night, the night before this hearing, that instead of testifying, they'll just be submitting written remarks. That's not just disrespectful, it's a slap in the face to every New Yorker who deserves answers. At a moment of unprecedented budget threats, the administration at City Hall should be standing with us and not ducking accountability. When we held our March hearing on the preliminary budget, we were warned that cuts were coming. Well, now they're here and they're hitting hard. Let's be clear. Approximately 10% all in of our city budget comes from federal funding. And just a few months into Trump's return, the federal government has already clawed back hundreds of millions in legally appropriated dollars from Congress, money we counted on to provide housing, health care, food, and shelter for New Yorkers. In February, FEMA yanked $80 million meant for migrant shelters. In March, the feds announced they were pulling all remaining COVID relief for cities and states. And just last week, Mayor Adams confirmed another $188 million in migrant reimbursement funds were being pulled. And while working people are getting squeezed, the billionaires are doing just fine. Let's talk about Elon Musk. He's taken more than $38 billion in government handouts, federal contracts, tax breaks, you name it. Now he's the de facto president since he spent some $300 million to buy the election, in charge of crafting a federal budget that slashes aids to seniors, veterans, and working families. You'd be surprised to know what federal programs didn't get cut a single cent. That would be Elon Musk billions in defense contracts. While everyday New Yorkers pay their fair share, Elon Musk games the system and laughs all the way to the bank. Our tax dollars built his empire, but now that it's time to reinvest in our communities, suddenly it's all cuts and clawbacks. It's always socialism for the rich and austerity for the rest of us. This isn't about belt-tightening, it's about broken priorities. That's why today's hearing matters. That's why the administration should be here with us, telling us what their plan is to fight back against these cuts from the federal government. We need a real plan to protect New Yorkers and their services, one that doesn't cave to Trump or cater to billionaires, and one that stands up for the working people who make the city work. Before I hand it back to Chair Ressler, I want to thank the folks behind the scenes on the council side who make these hearings happen, especially our incredible Finance Division team, Brian Sarfo, Committee Counsel, Julia Haramis, the Finance Unit Head, Michael Sherman, the Principal Financial Analyst, and my Senior Advisor, John Yedden. I'll now turn it back over to my co-chair today, Councilman Ressler.
I just want to ask, we have not actually received this supposed written testimony from the administration? Nobody has that, right? No. Okay. So the written testimony that they were preparing, because they didn't have the courtesy to show up and answer questions or to explain what the administration is doing to prepare for this the chaos coming out of Washington is quite remarkable. I think it speaks to just the complete incompetence that we are all experiencing on the other side of City Hall right now. With that, we will begin with IBO. Where are they? So I know we have Jackie Sherman and, I got confused here. They were at the top. And Sarah Parker. You guys can start us off, and the committee council will swear you in.
Good morning. Can you please raise your right hands? Do you affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in your testimony before this committee, and respond honestly to council member questions? Thank you.
Red is on. Yes. Great. Good morning. Chairs Brannan, Ressler, Majority Leader Farias, members of the Finance and Government Operations Committees. I am Jackie Sherman from the Independent Budget Office, and I'm joined this morning by my colleague Sarah Parker. My testimony builds on IBO Director Chafee's testimony last month, highlighting IBO's concerns about risks that ongoing federal actions pose to New Yorkers and to the city's fiscal health. Since January 20th, New York has faced a cascade of announcements of reductions in federal spending. Direct federal funding, currently around 8% of the city's expense budget, supports a range of core services. Federal dollars also flow through the state to the city, to the MTA and NYCHA, and directly to New Yorkers, such as Social Security payments. National economic uncertainty further complicates the picture. Volatility in trade policy poses significant risks for inflation, consumer spending, tourism, and ultimately state and local revenues. The administration has not yet publicly discussed how these risks can affect New York City's budget. Today, I will focus on questions that IBO believes should be answered in the upcoming executive budget. The city's budget process must embrace transparency and fiscal realism. The budget continues to understate costs for uniform personnel overtime, Carter cases, and funding for city FEPs. Meanwhile, the budget overestimates the city's payroll costs and costs for services to asylum seekers. At the same time, the city also faces a critical policy decision: what to do with the projected fiscal year 2025 budget surplus. IBO encourages the council to weigh the merits of two options: placing funds into reserves or using them to prepay next year's expenses. While prepayment may offer short-term flexibility, applying the surplus to reserves provides more long-term stability as the city faces challenges posed by the federal administration. Some city agencies rely heavily on direct federal funding. Federal funding totals over half of the budget of HPD and more than 40% for ACS. Separate from the city's budget, funding is also critical. Federal funding is also critical to NYCHA, Health and Hospitals, and the MTA. Here, critical questions include: what specific federal programs has the administration identified as most vulnerable to cuts, and what planning is underway to assure that the city continues to meet the needs of New Yorkers served by those programs? Have any city agencies, particularly those facing the greatest risks, been asked to prepare contingency plans to address potential loss of funding? What is the administration doing to protect public health as the federal administration reduces support for the prevention of communicable diseases? And many federal workers who oversee program administration and process payments have lost their jobs, and more are threatened. Has the city noted any slowdowns in the processing of funds it expects to receive? The absence of a final state budget further complicates the picture. Reductions in federal aid for New York City layer additional risks on the city. The state funded 17% of the city's fiscal year 2025 budget, and federal funding totaled 38% of the state's budget last year. Public education appears to be at particular risk, with 41% of DOE's budget funded by the state, including federal dollars that flow through the state. Furthermore, close to $3 billion in state requests by OMB for asylum seeker aid and child care assistance remains up in the air. With this in mind, some important questions include: what assumptions is the city currently making about fiscal year 2026 funding from the state in the absence of an enacted state budget? Given announced cuts and plans to close the Department of Education, how does the administration, that's the Federal Department of Education, how does the administration plan to fund the 3,700 new teachers it just announced would be hired in fiscal year 2026 to meet the state's class size mandate? Governor Hochul recently indicated the Federal Department of Homeland Security has revoked hundreds of millions of dollars in infrastructure resiliency programs, including millions of dollars that flow to the city. How will the city address critical capital budget priorities to prevent and respond to future natural disasters? The administration has yet to publicly detail its economic assumptions in light of current discussions around trade, immigration, and tax policy, and how those underlie its revenue and expense forecasts. The administration should explain its assumptions regarding how inflation, GDP growth, and the chances of recession affect the local economy. Rapidly changing federal trade policy could affect local job creation and the city's income, business, and sales tax bases. Tariffs could change the city's purchasing power for goods and supplies. and volatility in the bond market may hinder the city and authorities' ability to borrow. Finally, the city's nonprofit sector faces mounting fiscal stress as many organizations reel from material cuts to their own budgets while simultaneously witnessing devastating policy changes aimed at the communities they serve. These providers operate with thin margins and delayed reimbursements. The administration should articulate a clear strategy for supporting this critical sector in the face of compounding risks. The serious fiscal uncertainties facing the city have real implications for the services all New Yorkers rely upon. Now more than ever, New York City needs a budget process that is transparent, realistic, and focused on long-term stability. IBO remains committed to providing analysis to support policymaking and responsible fiscal management. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. We welcome your questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Ms. Sherman, for your testimony today and for your many years of government service. I wanted to ask about kind of reserves in the rainy day fund. According to OMB's calculations, reserves for FY26 are at $8.6 billion. Do you think that we should be increasing that the administration should be increasing reserves in the executive budget? And also, has IBO considered under what scenarios you think it's appropriate to spend down the rainy day fund?
Good morning. I'm really glad we have this opportunity to talk about the reserves that the city currently has. There is about $8.2 billion in reserves, but they are in different forms, different accounts. So first, just for the general public, I'd like to explain a little bit about what each of these reserves are. We have about $1.5 billion in a general fund reserve, and this is split between a general reserve and a capital stabilization reserve. This is money that we park in the budget, and as the year winds down, we start spending it. So that year to year will be spent down in the budget. Separately, and this is, I think, going to be the focus of what we're talking about today, the city has something called colloquially known as the Rainy Day Fund, which also goes by the technical name of the Reserve Stabilization Fund. So in OMB documents, that's how it's referred to. And this is currently about $2 billion. This allows the city to take surplus money and separate it from the general fund in a way that previously to this being created under the de Blasio administration with Albany passing legislation, the city had to have a balanced budget and was much more limited on its ability to have a reserve account. Before we created the Rainy Day Fund, the city largely used the Retiree Health Benefits Trust, which is another place that we have money that could be considered a type of reserve. Essentially, the trust is how we pay for retiree health benefits. It acts similar to a pension in that it's investments, but currently it has roughly about $5 billion in liquid assets, and annually the retiree health benefits cost about $3.5 billion. So in theory, the city could put less money into the retiree health benefit trust and therefore free up money to use elsewhere. All this to say, the city has a cushion, but right now, at least as of the preliminary budget, the administration, the Independent Budget Office, City Council Finance all projected a surplus for the current fiscal year. The size varied, but the question is right now, what are we going to do with that surplus? And as our testimony focused, there is the option to prepay next year's expenses, so to use it to create a cushion for next year, or the option to put some or all of it into the rainy day fund. I think the question at hand, you can put some or all of it into either of those options, to be clear. The question at hand is right now, we're facing what we know is going to be a fall. There's going to be a cliff in funding, and the question is how much of a cushion are we able to build right now? The Rainy Day Fund, when it was authorized in Albany through legislation, was for periods of economic turmoil and a loss of revenues. That was the discussion around how it was created. When it was created, I don't think anyone foresaw a world in which federal dollars were going to be part of this equation, but I think it was 4 times when the city was facing unforeseen circumstances and needed a cushion to rely on, and it created that mechanism.
Thank you. I'll just do one or two more and kick it over to colleagues. As I imagine you're all in conversation with city agencies and OMB, and we certainly are as well, what information and transparency do you think we should be seeking from OMB about the precarious financial situation we find ourselves in with the federal kind of upheaval? Are you aware of kind of centralized tracking of federal grants at city agencies? How many staff are funded by federal grants? What vulnerabilities city agencies are facing as a result of unstable federal funding? Do you know if that information from IBO's engagement and analysis is being tracked centrally in any way? Do you believe that it is? Anything along those lines would be helpful.
Thank you for the question, Council Member. And we are in communication with the administration as we prepare for the next publication on the executive budget. I can't comment on specifics of the administration's management and plans
Or lack thereof.
at this time. Our focus has been, and the focus of our testimony has been, as the focus of your question, is on questions that need to be asked throughout the executive budget process.
Can I ask this question? Are you aware as of now that OMB tracks total federal spending that we're receiving by agency, staff that are covered, vulnerabilities? Do you know if there's a central task force in OMB from your experience that evaluates and assesses that risk? Is that something that is to your knowledge?
So one thing that is trackable is how much money we receive from the federal government and how much has actually been received. So not only what we submit for reimbursements, but what has actually come in.
Right.
So that is something that we are very much actively tracking.
And have you noticed, has the city made any improvements in actually spending down the federal grants that we've received to make sure that we don't have additional clawbacks of federal money like we've experienced in the first 90 days of the Trump administration?
So one of the interesting things about the timing of receiving the money is that a large share of federal dollars are received by the city after the end of the fiscal year in which they are reimbursing expenses.
Right.
So I think right now, as we wind down this fiscal year, that's going to become a crucial question.
Okay. And then just lastly, we've already seen some clawbacks, some significant cuts at the federal level impacting the Head Start New York office or public health grants to the health department. Are there any ways that IBO can share any analysis to date of how the cuts that have already happened are impacting New York City government, or is it too preliminary for you all to share any insight there?
There's the question that we're waiting to really see an answer to, and would look for the Adams administration and also the Hochul administration to provide more clarity on, is if federal dollars dry up in a particular area, what is the plan to use state or city dollars to backfill that, which then could impact places those city dollars and those state dollars otherwise were intended for. So I want to be clear and really have everyone listening, particularly a broader audience, understand that a federal cut in one particular area could also ripple through a completely different area of policy and of programming,
Right.
depending on how the state and the city choose to respond.
Yeah.
Thank you. If you were in charge of the most populous city in the country, what would you be doing right now?
Thank you for the question, Council Member. We're here to testify from the perspective of the city's independent budget office.
Well, I understand. What are some of the things that you think the administration could or should be doing right now?
As we've highlighted in our testimony, one thing that we feel very strongly about is having accurate and realistic and transparent budgeting on what we do know. So there's a lot of uncertainty around what is happening in federal policy and federal reimbursements. There is a lot of uncertainty in what's happening with the national economy, the local economy. But there are areas that IBO has highlighted in its preliminary budget report, and we will continue to highlight, of the budget that we know are either underspended, underfunded, or that are overstated. And that is not providing a clear picture of the financial position of the city in places that we know with more certainty about. And so first and foremost, transparency on the things that we do have information on.
Okay. Colleagues?
Councilmember Williams, followed by Councilmember Brewer. Oh, we're going to skip Councilmember Williams and go right to Councilmember Brewer.
For me, okay. Jackie, given the many years you had as the attorney for general welfare, which I remember, I'm interested particularly in the human services cuts. And do you have a sense at IBO between obviously Medicaid being on that list, ACS being on that list, et cetera? Do you have some sense of what those cuts could impact in terms of our human services? And what could be the result?
Conducting a thorough and comprehensive assessment of the cuts across many areas has been complicated by the pace, the breadth, and the ongoing uncertainty surrounding many of the announced cuts. Collectively, they threaten the well-being of millions of New Yorkers, and particularly, as you state, people who depend on safety net programs.
So IBO hasn't, because we don't know yet, hasn't done a study of what exactly those cuts could mean for New Yorkers, right? Because we don't know exactly what.
We don't have enough information definitively at this point. We are tracking changes, we are analyzing, and we are looking forward to being able to present further information.
Okay. Second question is regarding the either rainy day or other kinds of payment for the future. That is hard to understand for the public because, you know, you want to use what you have now because you don't have health care, you don't have, et cetera, food. So how do you balance those two? Because I do, as having been on this finance committee for the last 100 years, I understand the need to do the wait for the future and bank it. But how, I mean, do you have some sense of how that could work? I know Andrew Rain in today's Daily News, thank you, Andrew, very good op-ed, also said, you know, put your money aside. But it's hard for people to understand when they are starving. How do you balance that?
Great question. We presented in our testimony two options of what to do with any surplus that we do have out of the current fiscal year 2025. The first is a prepayment. And so, again, to unpack this because it is hard to understand, when the city runs a surplus, it uses that extra money to prepay down expenses that we know we're going to incur next year. This is usually debt service, so the cost of money that we've borrowed. What that does, that allows the city to maintain a balanced budget. The city is legally required to have a balanced budget in its current fiscal year, and as it plans its next year. Prepayment is a shift of dollars from this year to next year. The rainy day fund is a shift of dollars from this year to whenever you choose to use it. And I think one of the questions is the rainy day fund was newly created under the de Blasio administration, and we've put money in it, but we haven't tapped it yet. And I think that's a question for everybody is, what does it look like? What does this emergency that we set this money aside look like? And I think that's really the question we're asking ourselves today.
So that would be one of the issues that you would, if you were in charge, to decide what should be done with that money to take care of current challenges.
It's really a question of thinking about, is this a question of money this year and next year, or money this year, next year, and the following year and the following year. Like, it's really a time horizon question.
I never worry about the future, but everybody else does, and so do the bonding agencies. I understand that. All right. One final question is the concern of the lawsuits, because what's going to happen is you will end up with, okay, this is a disaster. We go to court, the issue gets reversed, and it's very confusing for everybody. It's happening already in terms of the federal agencies. Do you have any sense? I mean, it's hard to know. What are the courts going to do? We don't know. But do you have any sense of how that could play out, or how you would suggest managing in that kind of a situation? I like to hope the courts are going to do the right thing, and that, how can you end up with, today's papers are full of one agency that has literally nobody there to administer the program. So that to me would be a lawsuit. So I'm sort of wondering where you think that's going to go, or what you would suggest handling that in terms of funding.
We can't tell you exactly where it's going to go, and I think that's only one layer of uncertainty that the city is facing. There are so many layers of uncertainty, which leads us to call for the city to have a more transparent and realistic approach that assesses risks, and for the city to engage in contingency planning, because we're clearly in an environment of rapid change, where whatever our plan is today or tomorrow or on July 1st may change very rapidly.
I agree with you. I do worry that people starve and don't have health care. So this is life and death, and as we know. So I'm worried. U.S. aid those cuts are already killing people around the world. So I worry that as we're talking about transparency, it's important, but then we have to know exactly where we need to fill the gaps. All right. Thank you.
Councilmember Williams.
You may not be able to answer this, but one question I had asked city agencies during the prelim budget hearings was about the racial equity plans. And the racial equity plans were supposed to be essentially attuned to the budget and reflective of the budget. As you may know, the mayor's office has not released them. They're over like 400 and maybe 60 days late now. And there are some theories around why. And so do you think that as the city continues to strengthen our equity plans, that may also have federal implications, and that could be a reason why the mayor's office hasn't released the racial equity plans? Or what's your thought about that? Because I know that was like a leading question, but just wondering your thought about that.
Council member, that's an excellent question that we have not had the opportunity to focus on. And if you'd like, we are happy to follow up with you and your staff after to further spell out the questions and look into it further.
Okay, thank you. I'll follow up.
Great. And that is a very important question that I think we were eager to ask the administration about today for how they're planning and coordinating. We saw what the state education department said and underscored their commitment to DEI. We've heard silence from the administration. And, we have 50 people that have come here today from dozens of nonprofits, from CUNY, from the IBO, from the CBC. And the Adams administration not only fails to attend, OMB doesn't come, Federal Legislative Affairs doesn't come, City Hall doesn't send a representative. No agencies are coming. No agencies are here. A majority of our city's our HPD budget comes from the federal government, and nobody's here to talk about what's happening. What's happening to child care funding? What's happening to public health funding? What's happening to emergency management? It is mind-boggling to me that the Adams administration is it's worse than being asleep at the wheel. This is negligence. This is a total dereliction of duty. With that, thank you all for being here. We're going to shift it over to public testimony. But I first want to acknowledge my colleagues who are here with us, and I apologize. On Zoom, we have Councilmember Shahana Hanif, Councilmember Francisco Moya, Deputy Speaker Diana Ayala, and in person we've had with us Councilmember Ina Vernikov and Councilmember Yusuf Salam. Thank you all for being with us today for this important hearing. The City Council clearly thinks this is an important issue. We wish the administration did as well. With that, I'm now going to open this hearing to public testimony. I want to remind members of the public that this is a formal government proceeding and that decorum shall be observed at all times. As such, members of the public shall remain silent at all times. The witness table is reserved for people who wish to testify. No video recording or photography is allowed from the witness table. Further, members of the public may not present audio or video recordings as testimony, but may submit transcripts of such recordings to the Sergeant of Arms for inclusion in the hearing record. If you wish to speak at today's hearing, please fill out an appearance card, even if you register in advance, with the Sergeant at Arms and wait to be recognized. When recognized, you will have 3 minutes to speak at today's hearing. If you have a written statement or additional written testimony you wish to submit for the record, which the administration has failed to do, please provide a copy of that testimony to the Sergeant at Arms. You may also submit written testimony to testimony@council.nyc.gov within 72 hours of this hearing. Audio and video recordings will not be accepted. I will now call up our next panel, which will just include Andrew Ryan from the Citizen Budget Commission. Thank you very much, Mr. Ryan. And you know what? We'll just give a heads up to the next panel who's going to follow. We'll have Melanie Samuels from the Campaign Against Hunger, Mohammed Razvi from the Council of People's Org, Rachel Klepper from UNH, United Neighborhood Houses, and Alana Tornello from Human Services Council. You all are on deck following the CBC. Thank you.
Thank you all for having me today. I'm Andrew Ryan, President of the Citizens Budget Commission. Thanks for the offer. Good morning, chairs, and all the council members. Thank you for the opportunity. The range of possible federal cuts is broad and the magnitude uncertain. Cuts in direct funding to city government will not be the only challenge. Possible funding reductions will affect the state, NYCHA, health and hospitals, as well as New Yorkers who directly receive federal benefits such as SNAP and enhanced Obamacare, enhanced premiums. Additionally, regulatory changes in economic policies such as tariffs could lead to higher inflation and a greater chance of recession. CBC urges a proactive, forward-looking response to protect New Yorkers. The city should prepare now while resources remain available and flexibility remains intact. Waiting for clarity on which specific risks pan out would not only not be fiscally prudent, but also increase the potential harm to New Yorkers. Federal aid cuts could have profound impacts. Federal aid comprises $7.4 billion of the city's fiscal year 26 preliminary budget, including funds for educating low-income students, child care vouchers, school food programs, family shelters, and more. NYCHA relied on $1.4 billion in federal operating support for public housing last year, while $2.7 billion in federal funds supported more than 133,000 housing vouchers across NYCHA and the city. Additionally, the state receives $91 billion from the federal government, primarily for public health insurance, Medicaid, the Essential Plan, Child Health Plus, and education and capital funding for transportation. In response to federal cuts, the state may reduce aid to the city or have to slash services that directly run, such as unemployment insurance and state parks, just for examples. Medicaid and the Essential Plan cuts would also sap H&H revenues, at the same time potentially increasing demand for its services if New Yorkers lose public health insurance coverage. The city will not be able to backfill all federal reductions. Rather, it should preserve the services that provide the most critical support for high-need New Yorkers, our economy, and our quality of life. The city may rightly choose to shift funds from other programs to cover federal reductions to critical services, meaning federally funded programs are not the only ones at risk. CBC recommends that the city, 1, hold the line on new spending in the executive and adopted budgets. 2, buttress the general reserve with at least $1 billion next year to help absorb another $1 billion to help absorb the immediate blow of federal cuts. 3, strengthen the rainy day fund by depositing at least $500 million and reserve the fund for a short-term emergency or like a recession. 4, implement a program to eliminate the gap to restrain spending growth, but focus on efficiency and shrinking programs that deliver less value. And finally, end the budget gimmickry and present accurate, reasonable estimates of expenses and revenues. These recommendations are not about austerity. They're designed to strategically manage risk, protect critical services New Yorkers need, and build resilience. Unfortunately, it's even harder now because the city has built up spending more than it can afford. In fact, in 24, we spent $1.1 billion more than we took in. $1.1 billion more in 24 than we took in that year if you adjust for timing. So thank you very much for the opportunity to testify. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much for being with us today. We really appreciate your expert testimony, and while I think the CPC is consistent in its calls for more savings and fiscal responsibility, this does feel like a moment where these calls ring particularly true. I just wanted to reiterate a question that I asked to the IBO. From your extensive experience in city government and your close working relationship with administrations, what centralized tracking are you aware of that OMB does of the federal funding that we receive, both how many jobs are associated with it in city government, how efficiently that money is being spent down, and what we can and to ensure that we are planning and preparing effectively for the upheaval that we're experiencing now. I just worry that kind of in the OMB model of every task force is focused on its set of agencies, is there somebody with a global view that's looking at the broader risks that we're facing as a city?
I regularly talk to OMB. We have not had this discussion. I do not know the specific answer on how they are planning. I will say we get publicly available data. Your staff, I assume, has more access. We know, for example, and we have an appendix in our testimony about what programs are federally funded, and I think the appendix is helpful because it's federal grants over $100 million. So you can see that TANF is $1.5 billion spread among 2 agencies. You can see how much Title I money is, federal food money is. So that's helpful. We know from publicly available documents that there are 54,300 full-time equivalent staff that are state and federally funded. I don't know the division of that, but I assume that OMB does. What they are doing to plan, listen, these are professionals who know about the world, and I assume they are doing some planning. I do not know specifics, and I think it would be helpful. I do know that 15 days from now, we're going to see an executive budget, and as we recommend, money in the rainy day fund, general reserves, and transparency so that all the revenues and all the spending is accurately reflected so that we can plan, we should see that in the executive budget.
And if I may, in your previous hat in a key leadership role in the health department over a number of years, your analysis of the significant shrinkage that we're seeing from HHS, the lack of reliability that we I think can no longer count on CDC and FDA in the same ways that we have historically forever. What are the ways in which you think the city and our impressive public health department needs to step up and help fill some of the gaps that have been created by the federal government? Recognizing this is a moment for fiscal restraint, which I know is your overarching point, I know you would agree that these are really important functions that the federal
I
government
spent a lot of my life in public health.
Right.
Listen,
help.
the New York City Health Department is still one of the greatest health departments in the world. I won't say the greatest because I'm a researcher and I haven't analyzed everyone. In the first 2 terms of the Bloomberg administration when I was there, I did over 12 pegs. I think it was 12. I need to go back. We figured out how to improve health while we were dealing with, budget problems. What we see coming, what we've already seen come, and what we see coming might be much more extreme than that. Again, as we know what might be at risk, but we don't know what cuts will happen to the federal government, and we don't know how big they will be. I think the approach is the same, which is to identify the impact of every program, what has the most critical impact on the most high-need New Yorkers today, and prevents disease and protects the public health, in the future, and make sure that the resources that are available, what is from the federal government, state, and of course the city, is focused on those resources, and other things that have benefits but might not be as impactful will have to shrink. That is the approach. That is the right approach to use, and I think the experts at the health department, I hope, because every day they're focused on health. These are people who, no offense to myself, care about health every day and think about it all. And I hope that they are doing that work right now, as they should be all the time. But now, as you said, it's even more important.
We've seen 5 rounds of pegs or whatever it is in the Adams administration. The health department has experienced significant shrinkage under this mayor. There's less staff than there was, during the de Blasio years, significantly so. And yet, if we're no longer able to count on the research functions of HHS, if we're no longer able to count on high-quality data around infectious disease outbreaks like measles and how that puts us at risk, if we're no longer to count on the Food and Drug Administration to ensure that we're preventing outbreaks of salmonella effectively, it puts a greater onus on the health department to keep New Yorkers safe. And so while both reckoning with the fiscal downturn and the lack of federal funding coming in, we do need to make sure that we are making the smart and necessary investments to protect the health and safety of New Yorkers. And I worry greatly about the scale of the layoffs that Secretary Kennedy has imposed and his deeply misguided and dangerous policies, and how that really does require us and the state to do more to keep us safe.
And I think what this speaks to, and I think about what Councilmember Brewer was talking about, if you follow the federal money, the smart thing, if we get cuts, will not just be to shrink the money where those programs are, it's to allocate the city resources that remain in whatever federal government remains and whatever flexibility we have to make sure that we protect New Yorkers in the future. You're exactly right. And that, I think it speaks to, as you said, the health department, but throughout city government. Those programs that receive federal money are most proximately at risk. But frankly, for you and, of course, the mayor, it's about allocating the resources to protect New Yorkers in the best way possible, which might mean backfilling some and shrinking some city-funded programs.
Chair? We're going to shift to Councilmember Brewer, and if anyone else would like to jump in, please just let us know.
I mean, I suppose that if it was a very, as you suggest, transparent executive budget, then you could know to answer some of those questions. But if it's not, then we're going to have trouble figuring out where are the worst cuts that would impact New Yorkers the most. So my question is, with this rainy day fund, at what point do you think it should be used? How would you decide that, et cetera, et cetera?
So,
like I said, I'm not so good on the future. I like the current.
I
know the bond.
My grandmother, who came over with her, 16-year-old sister and twin brother on a boat many years ago, always told me, I keep some money aside in the coffee jar. I think it's a rule that we all think about personally, and hopefully we have the discipline, and I think it's a rule to protect New Yorkers today. As the IBO said, we have $2 billion in a rainy day fund. We should protect that for a short-term-ish emergency like a recession. We might be entering one. We will enter one, I can't tell you when. We know that prior to COVID, the average recession sapped the city revenues scaled to where we are around $10 billion. We have $2 billion in that fund right now. You can do the math. That's around 1/5 of that. We should protect that for that. Now we have the Retiree Health Benefits Trust. It was used, it should be to pay for, as a city retiree, all of our health. We have a $100 billion liability for all of our health insurance when we retire. We have $5 billion in the trust. That ratio ain't so good. Although the Blasio administration and the Bloomberg administration used it as a rainy day fund. We should actually protect that, to the extent we can. It's the right thing to do because we have that liability. So therefore, we have the rainy day fund. We have a general reserve next year. We need to bolster that. But the rainy day fund, let's hold it for the rainy day. And whatever we have of the surplus roll of the general reserve, it might be our transition fund. But remember, the federal cuts for the foreseeable future will be recurring. You sap a fund one time, then you're just creating another fiscal cliff. And we need to remember, the cuts right now that are being challenged in the courts are based on a federal continuing resolution based on the authorizations of the last Biden budget. The next federal annual budget will be written by this Congress and this president with fewer restraints, let alone, of course, reconciliation on the to pay for the tax cuts, which is where the Medicaid cuts might have get most affected.
Okay, thank you.
What do you think of OMB's suggestion that the more money we put into reserves, the more we might be vulnerable to?
This was a question that came up when we strongly advocated for the city to create the city charter change and then the state law to change rainy day fund, to create the rainy day fund, and we think there should be mandatory deposits and limited withdrawals. There's always been the question, well, if we can prepare, no one will come to the rescue. My observations of federal policy right now is that I have not seen it being dictated by how much New York City is holding in any one bank account. So I don't think that concern, which might be a state local concern at times. Again, I don't think it is overplayed and should be ignored because we need a rainy day fund, but I don't think that's what's driving the federal government right now. I think if we prepare for potential cuts, we will protect New Yorkers more.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just, last question I wanted to ask is about Medicaid. 4 million New Yorkers rely on Medicaid. We already have many safety net hospitals, multiple safety net hospitals. I mean, we just experienced a major hospital closure in Lower Manhattan. We have multiple safety net hospitals that are in a very vulnerable position. Has the CBC begun to do any analysis if the full $880 billion in proposed federal cuts to Medicaid were enacted, on what impact that would have on health care in New York City and the stability of our inpatient facilities and other healthcare institutions that rely on this funding?
We have not. Kaiser Family Foundation has run some scenarios. It's worth looking at what they've funded. I think the way to start thinking about this, and again, it is uncertain both what the cuts will be and what the magnitude will be, and as we see, the federal scoring rules might be in flux as well. So how they pay for the tax cuts, it may require that 880 energy and commerce cut or not. I don't know, and I can't predict that. I do know that when you look at New York, we're special in ways. We have the Essential Plan, which is the Obamacare basic health plan, which only we and Minnesota have. It is an outlier. If I look at risk, I generally, whether it be a corporate merger and acquisition or cuts, I look at the things that are different in different places. So maybe the Essential Plan, which covers 1.7 million New Yorkers, lower income, making too much for Medicaid, but still covered by the Essential Plan, and some immigrants. 1.7 million New Yorkers statewide, 1 million New Yorkers in the city. That might be more at risk. Again, we don't know where it'll come, but we've thought about it in those ways, but haven't modeled what that would do cascading down.
Okay. Well, just want to thank you for being with us today and for your thoughtful testimony and great op-ed this morning, and very much look forward to continuing this conversation, as it's going to be an intense period of time, I think.
Thank you. We're
policymakers.
Glad to be of service.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to make a slight modification on our next panel per request from the audience. It will be Alana Tornello from the Human Services Council, Rachel Klepper from United Neighborhood Houses, Melanie Samuels from the Campaign Against Hunger, and Joseph Rosenberg from Catholic Community Relations Council. I did not know that was the acronym that Joe Rosenberg used, but you learn something new every day.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I didn't know that was the acronym you used, Catholic Community Relations Council. I just always associate you with Catholic Charities, but
No, it's broader than that.
it's broader. That's good to know.
Some of your colleagues know.
You learn something new every day. But Gail already knew, as we could have anticipated. Thank you. I'll give you this guy. I'll give you these guys. Okay, you guys can begin in whichever order you like, and the fourth person who's on their way, hopefully they can bring up a chair. Could the sergeant help us with a fourth chair? Well, we'll get that going. Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Good morning, Chair Brannon, Chair Ressler, members of the City Council. Thank you for giving us 3 minutes to testify. It's much appreciated. I'm Joseph Rosenberg, the Executive Director of the Catholic Community Relations Council. Thank you for holding this hearing. Its focus could not be timelier. Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of New York and the Diocese of Brooklyn and Queens have been providing shelter, food, and clothing to New Yorkers for more than 1 century, not just during disasters such as Superstorm Sandy and the COVID-19 pandemic, but on every day of every year. We also assist thousands of immigrants in New York with legal services and operate the New York Americans Hotline and the Moya Immigration Legal Support Hotline that serves more than 160,000 people annually. In late March, we were notified that 80% of our legal services contract with the federal government to assist unaccompanied minors was being terminated, resulting in the loss of $4.3 million. We also learned 4 days ago that our $1.45 million federal dollar contract to provide workshops, legal consultation, as well as pro se assistance in New York's 3 immigration courts has been canceled. We will try to find ways to continue to represent unaccompanied minors and asylum seekers without having to rely on the federal government, but it will be a daunting and long-term challenge. Both Catholic charities combined operate over 80 food pantries throughout the 5 boroughs and serve more than 8 million meals annually. We have faced many challenges assisting New Yorkers over the last century, but we currently face a crisis in hunger and food insufficiency we have not seen before. This is due to the rising poverty rate of New Yorkers, the dramatic increase of New Yorkers who are rent-burdened, and the unprecedented federal attacks on many programs that protect our clients. 2 of these are SNAP and the Emergency Food and Shelter Program. SNAP provides essential funding to address food insecurity for vulnerable Americans. The proposed congressional reduction of nearly $230 billion from this program is particularly troubling and will have significant consequences by increasing the number of Americans who face hunger on a daily basis. The Emergency Food and Shelter Program is also a crucial federal resource. This was placed on hold by the federal government in March, and as a result, both Catholic charities in both dioceses have lost over $850,000 each, a challenging blow to our ability to feed clients. We've seen the number of New Yorkers at food pantries increase significantly. We're not just assisting more working families, seniors, and children. Newer clients include college students, recent college grads who are either unemployed or underemployed, youth aging out of foster care, and many new migrants with infants. The plight of hungry children is particularly heartbreaking, with more than 1 in 4 children in our city living in poverty. With so many New Yorkers going hungry and the termination of federal programs, we urge that $20 million in emergency food funding for federal pantries be included in the FY26 New York City budget for both Catholic charities as well as our partners Met Council and the Hispanic Federation. An additional challenge that nonprofit human service providers face is a lack of prompt payment when awarded social service contracts. With unprecedented federal budget cuts targeted at nonprofits, it's especially important the city expedite late contract payments. Otherwise, New Yorkers will not receive the services they need. There is no justification for funds to be provided months or years after a contract has been awarded, and to tolerate a business-as-usual mentality when it comes to paying providers, especially during these unprecedented times. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I just want to thank Councilmembers Powers and Schulman for being with us as well. And we'll go on to the next panelist.
Good morning, and thank you, council members, for this oversight hearing. My name is Alana, representing the Human Services Council. We're a coalition of over 180 human services organizations in New York. Our sector's collective contracted work with the city provides lifelines for millions of New Yorkers and maintains a workforce in the hundreds of thousands. We urge the City of New York to act now to protect human services from proposed cuts to nearly every federal funding stream touching our sector. We are facing a perfect storm. Threatened programs, Medicaid, SNAP, Head Start, Social Security, disaster grants, and more are direct lifelines for the communities we serve, for human services workers living on government-sanctioned poverty wages, and for organizational budgets providing critical care. It hits on all fronts and in all subsectors. This is not a drill. The disaster is here, and we sit in a critical window to respond. With that in mind, we outlined 4 actions for the city. First, urgently expedite all delayed contracting and payments with human services providers. A UNH survey highlighted this week found that $88.9 million was owed to 15 settlement houses in retroactive contracts. A survey of HSC membership at the close of 2024 found that 90% of respondents had delayed payments from the city, totaling $365 million, with over half experiencing over 6 months of delays. Fixing this is an immediate action that builds on recent progress and provides needed and already allocated resources in preparation for mass cuts. Second, initiate strategic and rapid drawdowns of city-managed federal funds. Third, prioritize protecting critical human services in the use of existing and new emergency reserves, as was earlier discussed. And last, and critically, implement a comprehensive counter strategy with the state. This could include clearer assessments of which funding streams and contracts are at risk, consistent, proactive notification across city agencies to nonprofit partners regarding those at-risk funds, preparing continuity of operation plans and flexible budgeting with contract holders, and closely coordinating with New York State and national and state nonprofit coalitions who are challenging federal actions. Take a moment and picture our city without these lifelines, because the rest of this testimony has some very concrete recommendations, but we have to root it in that, because in that extreme, caregivers are without childcare or support for aging loved ones. New Yorkers navigating our economic and housing crisis lose access to safe food, shelter, health services, case management, advocacy, and more, and potentially thousands fall through the cracks of large-scale disasters and everyday emergencies. Our leaders are gambling with our city's future, and versions of New York City without its critical lifelines are right now on the table. We are fighting for a different one. City leaders need to act now and act fast to support us. Thank you, and please refer to our written testimony for more information.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Rachel Klepper, and I'm a research analyst at United Neighborhood Houses, a policy and social change organization representing neighborhood settlement houses that reach over 800,000 New Yorkers. UNH thanks the Council for its leadership as we strive to protect New Yorkers from potentially devastating actions from the federal government. Settlement houses report that an average of 22% of their entire organizational budgets are funded from federal sources, either direct or state and local pass-through, with some as high as 50%. The elimination of federal funding could decimate programs while depriving settlement house community members of needed resources. As we speak today about how to prepare for changes to federal funding, cuts and reductions in infrastructure are already underway. The crisis is already occurring. One federal funding stream under attack is Head Start, which provides early childhood care, education, and supports for 19,000 New York City children. When community-based organizations run Head Start, they do so with attention to the needs of entire families. At one settlement house, a 3-year-old attends Head Start while their parent is in job training and their grandparent visits the senior center. Recent headlines indicate that the very existence of Head Start is in jeopardy. The abrupt closure of 5 regional offices has left providers unsure how to move forward with payments, budget modifications, or contract renewals. Providers continue to run programs, but they are deeply concerned, which I share more about in my written testimony. Without Head Start, thousands of children would lose their programs, and parents would be unable to afford childcare, meaning many might leave their jobs. It is vital that city leaders reach out to members of Congress to oppose all cuts to Head Start. These threats compound the catastrophic impacts of other funding cuts affecting low-income families. UNH and our members are bracing for the devastating effects of enacted or potential cuts to programs, including the Emergency Food and Shelter Program, Medicaid, and SNAP. Settlement houses were already struggling to meet the need for food, healthcare, and housing. A 2023 UNH survey found that nearly 1 in 3 settlement house families were sometimes, often, or always unable to afford food for their children. Funding cuts don't just affect programs, they harm the children, seniors, and families who rely on them. Federal funding cuts reveal the administration's rejection of policies that support the most vulnerable. Some settlement houses are concerned that they will be retaliated against if they speak out, putting their communities at even greater risk. UNH needs you to speak out, share these stories, and urge federal lawmakers to oppose funding cuts. We also urge city leaders to support their CBOs. Settlement houses are places that people trust through challenges. Reliable funding will go far to ensure communities have access to supports they need to thrive. We look forward to continuing to partner with you to keep New York's neighborhoods strong.
Thank you so much. And Ms. Samuels. I know 4 is a tight fit, but we appreciate you all accommodating.
That's all right. I'll do the best I can. See, we know how to work together.
There's plenty of room.
Good morning, Chair Ressler, Chair Brannon, and esteemed members of the community and Committee of Government Operations and Committee on Finance. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on behalf of the Campaign Against Hunger, TICA, a leading anti-hunger and social service non-for-profit that has proudly served New York City for over 26 years. My name is Dr. Melanie Samuels, and I appear before you with deep sense of urgency. Our non-for-profit, like many others, stand at a breaking point. While our mission has always been to fight hunger and poverty through emergency food assistance, workforce development, urban agriculture, today we must also fight to defend the very infrastructure that allowed us to serve. Non-for-profit like TICA are essential to the functioning of this city. We are not peripheral, we are a lifeline. In the past year alone, we distributed over 17 million culturally responsive meals to more than 1.5 million New Yorkers, including seniors, working family veterans, and newly arrived asylum seekers. Recently, the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA awarded TICA over $1.3 million through a Shelter and Service Program, SSP, to support migrant families. This grant intended to sustain emergency food distribution through 2026 has now been frozen without due process or cause. TICA was the only New York City nonprofit selected for this funding. No violations were cited, no wrongdoings alleged, and yet we were being punished through vague, politically charged policies that indiscriminately target organizations under the guise of border enforcement rhetoric. This funding freeze is more than a blur, or this funding freeze has become inconvenient. It is a direct threat to food access for thousands. We have already invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in staffing, food procurement, and operation. Now we are being told to wait indefinitely while the families we serve cannot wait another day for a meal. We are presently have obtained a lawyer because we are now in violation. This moment calls for bold municipal advocacy. We ask the City Council to, 1, advocate on the federal level for a fair and expeditious review process for funding disbursements to non-for-profit, especially those caught in the broader enforcement dispute that do not apply to them. 2, introduce or support legislation that protects non-for-profit contractors from harmful and arbitrary funding freezes. 3, ensure transparency and accountability mechanism in how federal funding administered through city agencies are allocated and to withheld from non-for-profit partners. 4, and last, champion emergency stabilization funding for non-for-profit facing interruptions in federal funding streams and jeopardizing essential services. While we remain focused on our mission to feed, empower, and uplift our communities, we cannot do it with our hands tied behind our backs. Thank you for your leadership and for the opportunity to testify. Please refer to the written testimony. Are there any questions?
Thank you very much to the panel. I just had two brief questions. For Mr. Rosenberg, you mentioned, I think it was $5.75 million in federal cuts in your testimony to Catholic Charities Legal Services. Could you just speak to the scale of that cut as a percentage of the total budget? Is that leading to layoffs? Obviously, with the heightened actions, dangerous illegal actions by ICE, there's a greater need for legal services now than ever. What has been the impact day to day for Catholic Charities and your ability to support immigrant communities?
Well, this is a devastating hit, and one of the things that's most confusing about it is that it changes by the day. Sometimes contracts are terminated, sometimes they're revised. Like, for instance, the loss of the $4.3 million to assist legal services for accompanied minors. There's another $1.4 million in that contract, which, after some negotiations, won't be terminated for another 6 months, but that might be changed as well. So we're in flux. I don't have the specific totals of the amount of federal funding, but it is overwhelmingly what we rely upon for legal representation. Just as an example, getting away from fiscal numbers, the number of unaccompanied minors that have legal representation through this programs through Catholic Charities is over 600. And there are over 14,000 undocumented and documented immigrants who receive consultations, pro se assistance, and other things. We also have desks that are staffed at the 3 immigration courts in New York City. That is exclusively relied upon federal funding. That too has been terminated. So this is just a partial list of what we're facing. No doubt there will be many more in a week or two, but this is something that's important to say. The mission of the Catholic Church is to provide funding and assistance for those who need it. So right now, despite the loss of funding, we're going to try to find ways, whether it's through donations, moving funds in other directions, to try to continue this. Once people have representation, it's not like they can just all of a sudden lose their attorneys. That is just unacceptable for anyone, including us.
That's very helpful. And wanted to just ask UNH and HSC if you've done a survey of your members of what percentage of their funding is coming directly from the federal government. And if you haven't done a survey like that to date, is that something you're considering to just better understand the specific risks that your members are facing?
Sure. What we have done so far is analyze our members' audits, which share the funding streams that come from the federal government. So that's where the statistic that an average of 22% of their budgets is from federal sources, and that goes all the way up to 50%. So we started there, but we are continuing this conversation with our members.
Wow, that is devastating. Thank you.
And thank you for the question. There are a few surveys, both subsector, national and state, that are trying to get to this answer, and we're trying to support those, and also we'll explore working with both our coalition and the subsector coalitions we work with to get that information. And if we do so, we'll make sure to reach out.
And we should collaborate on these efforts to make sure that we're thinking through whatever we can do at the city level to support. It's, you know, I've just heard from so many nonprofits in my own district who have lost funding already and are just terrified for how they're going to balance their books and continue to employ their staff and provide their essential services when, you know, so many different funding streams are on the chopping block. We'll go to Councilmember Brewer, followed by Councilmember Williams. Unless you want to jump in? Oh, sorry, Councilmember Chair Duran first. Sorry.
Would this moment be a little bit easier for you if the city paid its damn bills on time?
Yes. I'll answer.
Absolutely. You want
No, I'm saying yes, definitely.
Right. Okay, thank you. Councilmember Brewer.
Absolutely, yes. My question is, in the papers today and previously, there is this discussion when people are laid off in Washington. Then, of course, it's like a budget cut to you because there's nobody there to answer the question. Today is horrific. It's a story of health and HHS laying people off so that nobody can get cooling during the summer. And, you know, people die when their apartment is, 100 degrees. So my question to you, although you may not know the answer, because I feel so terrible about these cuts to your amazing staff and the services that you provide, is are you finding that in addition to budget cuts, or maybe in lieu of budget cuts, they lie and say, oh, we don't have budget cuts, but in fact they do because there's nobody there to administer. So I just didn't know that's something that's coming out. Now that may get handled by the courts, but God knows when.
Yes, thank you. That's an extremely good point. That's happening not just to, I assume, the nonprofits here, but to everyone. It's very difficult to get any questions answered. Websites go down. Phone lines that provided information have been extinguished. Even when you get hold of someone who, in good faith, is trying to be helpful, they might not have information that happened the night before. So a tremendous amount of the information coming out of the agencies we deal with in Washington is either non-existent or not reliable.
That's a crime. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Williams.
Yeah, I just want to know if any of your organizations or coalition organizations have been contacted by DOJ. I was reading an article that they've extended their reach to also nonprofit organizations receiving federal funds. So just wondering, because I know there was an article today about Vera, or the other day.
I can answer. The closest I've been is where we've gotten a letter that we're in violations of serving migrants, and we had to obtain a lawyer because we have to appeal. And so with that came the cancellation of our contract, and we have already spent close to $600,000 to be reimbursed a few weeks ago, and it was not, and so there's nothing there. So we have gotten 2 letters already.
They say you were in violation because you were serving food to migrants?
Yes.
Okay.
Oof. Okay. With that, I want to thank this panel for your thoughtful testimony and for being with us today, and we look forward to partnering together to try and protect your organizations and members most effectively. We will now invite Mohammed Razvi from the Council of People's Organization, Alice Moe from Homecrest Community Services, Jihei Fisher from Korean American Family Service Center, and Andrew Santa Ana from the Asian American Federation to join us on the panel. And I will just do the next panel too so that people are ready. We have Miranda from La Colmena, Aaron Sanders from Grand Street Settlement, Brian Ellicott Cook from Sage, and Kevin Kiprofsky from Live On New York. And I will apologize to everyone whose name has been butchered. Okay.
Oh, no.
Just you to avoid fucking up.
That's what I want to show them what people are. Hello, how are you? Thank you for your guidance. Great to see you. Good to see you. All right, how you doing? You want to start off? And then we'll start off. Yeah, that'll be nice.
Okay. Do you want to switch seats?
Just,
Oh, wow.
yeah, that's right. Just keep right there.
You all can testify in whatever order.
Okay.
So moved.
Great. Shall I start? Okay, great. Thank you, Chair Ressler and Brennan and members of the City Council for holding this important and timely testimony on preparing New York City for changes in federal funding. My name is Andrew Santa Ana, and I'm the interim co-executive director at the Asian American Federation, representing the collective voice of over 70 member nonprofits serving 1.5 million Asian New Yorkers. We're here today because New York's Asian community faces a trifecta of crises that signal the brewing of, as y'all mentioned, a coming storm. A sharp rise in anti-immigrant policies, wild swings in the economy from job losses to tariffs, and of course, draconian cuts in federal funding. And while our member organizations continue to exhibit resilience and extraordinary courage in this unstable climate to serve, house, feed, educate, and protect low-income Asian New Yorkers, our community is signaling that the clouds are gathering and the sky is darkening. Indeed, despite the model minority stereotype surrounding Asian Americans as wealthy and successful, our community faces significant hardship. 2/3 of our community are foreign-born, 20% of our community are non-citizens. And while we have grown 35% from 2010 to 2020, 1 in 3 Asian residents lives in low-income households, and we're twice as likely to experience poverty compared to white New Yorkers. 48% of our community is limited English proficient, and 42% of older adults are low-income, many of them living in poverty. In addition, through the cuts of federal funding, there are devastating impacts on domestic violence. According to the Asian Pacific Institute on Gender-Based Violence, up to 55% of Asian women in the United States have experienced some form of physical violence or sexual violence in their lifetime. So as we say, our member organizations provide a critical service bridge and human connection to our community that is experiencing hunger, fear, poverty, isolation, and hate violence. In addition, we know that across the city that our community members are hesitant to access services because of fears of unwarranted ICE raids. They are disenrolling from benefits, avoiding seeking medical care from hospitals, and disengaging from the community. And so on top of that, we know that the cuts of federal funding affects our community through food insecurity for older adults, through TFAP, and the Emergency Food Assistance Shelter Program. Our member and partner organizations rely on SNAP and food pantries. We rely on funding from the Office of Violence Against Women to protect survivors of domestic and sexual violence, and through Head Start programs to educate low-income youth and early childhood development. The Asian American Federation believes it is more critical than ever that the city reinforce its support for addressing these interconnected issues by supporting the community-based organizations that provide these services. Indeed, from the turmoil and tragedy of 9/11, through the 2008 financial crisis, through the COVID-19 pandemic, and the resurgence once again of anti-Asian violence, our member organizations have protected our community and provided a critical lifeline. Our recommendations are simple. Of course, protect this funding and strengthen partnerships with Asian-led and Asian-serving nonprofits that understand the needs of their communities to address these long-term needs. These challenges are complex, and we recognize that there are no easy answers. We thank you for your vital and courageous leadership at this time, and please hold the line for all New Yorkers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I have failed to acknowledge that we have Councilmember Palladino with us online, who represents one of the larger Asian American communities in the city, and whoever's up next.
Wonderful. Thank you, Chair Ressler and Chair Brennan. My name is Mohammed Razvi, and I run one of the largest South Asian Muslim organizations in Brooklyn. I just wanted to give you a sense of when someone says there's a few thousand people that come to your office for services, This is that data. This is how many thousands and thousands of people are coming to our office for services. Secondly, during COVID, this book was multiplied by 10. So during COVID, I had 10 of these books. That's how many people were coming to our offices. We serviced over 20.5 million pounds of food. And I can't even explain to you how desperate the people were. You just had to see them on the line, that, people who were average New Yorkers who had good jobs and how they were trying to survive. At this moment, all these cuts that are happening, I know some folks say the COVID's over, but it's not over for our folks. And when I say our folks, I mean the folks who are hard workers, and they're the ones who actually need. All these cuts that are happening are devastating. Recently, we were able to fortunately have our council member Ina Vernikoff also participate in providing food during Passover, which was great. Yesterday, we did it with our city council member Farrah Lewis, which was great. But for the Muslim community, for other community members, there's so much need. And it's a never-ending story. Everyone thinks it's over. It's not over. We urge you to actually, even if the OMB is going to think or the administration is thinking of where to put the funding or put the money, please put it into at least these programs which are essential, which is the survival for these community members, because these folks have nothing else. All they're here on those lines is just trying to get some food for their kids. And we do help them to enroll for SNAP, which also is being cut, which is unfortunate. So this is where our request is, just to make sure these essential services that are being cut, please focus on that, and please keep that continuous for us. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Brannon, Chair Ressler, and members of the committees. My name is Alice Moe, and I am the Policy and Advocacy Coordinator at Homecrest Community Services. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Shifts in federal funding threaten the programs that safeguard New York City's most vulnerable residents, especially lower-income, older adults, and immigrant communities, including the Asian American population we serve daily across our 4 centers in Brooklyn. At Homecrest, we see the life-changing impact of federal programs every day. In calendar year 2024, we enrolled 400 individuals in Medicaid and 1,100 in SNAP benefits. Recently, we have seen an increase in clients due to SNAP theft, with many coming in to us seeking guidance on how to protect their EBT cards from being stolen and pursue reimbursement for stolen benefits, underscoring just how vital these programs are to daily survival. We are equally concerned about how federal funding cuts would affect older adult services. Homecrest operates 2 older adult centers, funded in part by NYC Aging. In 2024, we served over 110,000 services. We delivered over 110,000 services to over 1,600 older adults. Our centers offer more than just daily nutritious meals. They offer a trusted and culturally responsive space that for many adults is the only place they like to go outside their homes. Here, they can receive assistance with healthcare and affordable housing applications, access case management, all in their preferred language. This is especially critical as 72% of older Asian New Yorkers have limited English proficiency. For fiscal year 2025, federal funding makes up 16% of NYC Aging's total budget, with the majority allocated to older adult centers. Combined with the proposed $100 million in cuts in the mayor's preliminary budget to an agency that has historically received less than 1% of the city's budget, even as older adults now represent 20% of the population. This puts centers like ours at serious risk of closure. In light of these challenges, we respectfully urge the City Council to protect the city's social safety net by first prioritizing sustained investments in AAPI community-based organizations that serve New York City's older adult and immigrant populations, thereby shielding life-sustaining programs from federal instability. Second, strengthening partnerships with trusted providers who have the cultural competence to meet local needs. And third, advocating decisively in response to federal shifts to protect and uphold the city's priorities. Thank you for your leadership and for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, Chair Brennan, Chair Ressler, and members of the committee. My name is Gia Fisher, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Korean American Family Service Center, a leading nonprofit organization that has supported immigrant survivors of gender-based violence across New York City for over 35 years. I'm here today to share our growing concern about the devastating impact of federal funding cuts, specifically the projected loss of our grants from the U.S. Department of Justice's Office on Violence Against Women, also known as OVW. These funds have been critical in supporting KFS's core services, including our 24-hour hotline, trauma-informed counseling, legal advocacy, legal services, economic empowerment, and transitional housing program. And these programs are very specific to the immigrant survivors of gender-based violence, not just all survivors, but immigrant survivors of gender-based violence. By the end of September 2026, KFSC is expected to lose up to $2 million in federal funding. This represents nearly 44% of our operating budget and has already forced us to freeze key hires and reevaluate essential programming. We're deeply concerned about how we will continue to meet the needs of the 3,000 survivors and families we serve annually. This moment is defined not only by financial strain, but by fear and instability. As we navigate this uncertainty, the need of our services only continue to grow. In 2024 alone, KFSC responded to nearly 5,000 hotline calls related to domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse, calls that often represent a survivor's first and only attempt to seek help. These cuts impact immigrant survivors who rely on organizations like KFSC for culturally and linguistically specific services. We urge the City Council to recognize this moment for what it is, a crisis for our communities. We respectfully call on you to increase investment in community-based, culturally specific organizations that serve immigrant survivors of gender-based violence. Without this support, organizations like KFSC will be forced to scale back, and we've already have been scaled back at a time when our communities need us the most. So we're committed to doing everything we can, but we cannot do this alone. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Very compelling panel. Councilmember Williams, I know had a question.
Yeah, what were the reasons that they cited that you'll lose the $2 million? Do you know how, where, why?
So they're not saying that they're cutting the funding. They're saying that they're reevaluating. So we're on hold. Like we're not.
And what was the allocation from? Was it like for?
It's the federal
violence. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the direct federal fundings through the OVW that are supporting the culturally specific organizations work for the immigrant survivors of gender-based violence.
Okay, thank you.
And Councilmember Schulman.
Hi, thank you all for testifying, and I know many of you. So I have a question, which is, do you find, given the immigration issues that are going on, that people are coming less for the services? And if so, how are you reaching out to them? And the reason I'm asking is because obviously the numbers are going to show that we need to give you money, and if they fall off, then somebody's going to say, oh, well, they don't have enough people. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So actually at KFSC, we hear this from other organizations, but because our location is confidential, due to the work, we have a 24-hour hotline. We're actually getting more calls.
Okay, how about the rest?
Yeah, so our food pantry line, actually 20% we lost. Yeah. However, but the friends who are coming, they say, my friend's not going to come. Can I take the bag? Okay. So the food is still needed, in other words, for them, but they're not showing up on the line. And what we have implemented, which was something I wish all organizations do this, all of our storefront says, members only or by appointment only. So no one can enter from public into the facility. And then lastly, what we are doing is we're actually delivering the food to the people's home, especially our seniors.
Just make sure you keep track of it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we're doing.
Okay.
at Homecrest, at our Sunset Park Center, which has a high immigrant population, we have recently seen just more people coming in trying to get naturalization forms because of the fears. Yeah.
Okay.
What we hear from our members and partners is, of course, that they have to adapt. So maybe trainings or education things that they've done in person, they've been taking place online. And then I think what we've heard from members and partners is it ebbs and flows, right? Depending on what's happening in the news, there might be more or less demand or fear. So I think, that trifecta of increased ICE or immigration activity to other things of food insecurity, I think folks are modulating based on what's happening in the news.
No, and please make sure to reach out to us if we can be helpful at all, even to help you with our federal partners and all of that, so which is really important. So thank you.
Just real quick. So right now it's difficult to get a renewal of a passport. People are calling me literally. They cannot renew. I mean, they're going online. There's no appointments, no nothing. And sadly, our attorneys are telling us they are receiving emails. If your client is not legal, tell them to leave. Those exact emails that everyone's getting.
That's disgusting.
Yeah.
I just
So
wanted to say that for
there's
the
no,
record.
what are you going to do? How are you going to represent anyone? But that is happening.
Yeah, I'll just say, of course, I know this was mentioned at the last panel as well, but the need for immigrant legal services, because what's happening is, because of the mis and disinformation, folks just don't have that basic language accessible legal services, so they can ask those basic questions about, those fears around public benefits, those fears around public charge, those fears around naturalization or showing up to interviews. So that affects their choices, and I think many folks are deciding to not seek food or not seek shelter or not, get protection from domestic and sexual violence as a result.
Okay, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I'm very grateful for this panel and for your, truly great work serving immigrant New Yorkers, serving all New Yorkers every day. We're seeing the federal government kind of deteriorate before our eyes, whether it's passports or Social Security. But it's also for many of the great established community-based organizations like the ones on this panel that rely on, federal discretionary grants and funding. Yep. That's the, first, I think that those are the items that are most readily on the chopping block. Mm-hmm. And it destabilizes our organizations, that destabilizes our communities, and we have to fight back and push back. And so I think we've got to do more collaborative federal advocacy. If the mayor won't work with us, then we should be working together directly and with our members of Congress to fight back and push in every way that we can. And I'm grateful for you all taking the time to share your experience and your expert testimony today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up, as I mentioned, Miranda from La Colmena, Aaron Sanders from Grand Street Settlement, Brian Ellicott Cook from Sage, Kevin Kiprowski from Live On New York, and the following panel will be Jade Vasquez from WIN, Gina Capuchitti, from New Destiny Housing Corp., Reverend Terry Troya from Project Hospitality, and Victoria Leahy from Homeless Services United. You all can testify in whichever order you are so moved.
Good morning, chairs and council member. My name is Miranda, and I'm the organizing associate at La Colmena, an immigrant rights organization proudly rooted in Staten Island. Today, I'm here with my sister organization who will be testifying as well. At La Colmena, our mission is to empower immigrant workers through education, culture, organizing, and economic development. In Staten Island, La Colmena has been unapologetically advocating for our immigrant community, even in the face of backlash. At La Colmena, we hold regular community sessions to hear directly from our neighbors, listening to their fears and questions. With the support of our trust consultant attorneys, we also provide consultation to provide accurate, reliable information. Too often, our community comes to us after encountering misinformation, especially online or through word of mouth. In some cases, community members have paid over $3,000 and have been misled by individuals claiming to be attorneys, claiming that they can offer a speedy citizenship process, going as far as creating fake USCIS documents and impersonating judges. More recently, we have seen people arriving at our doors with deportation notice or unsure how to navigate the new immigrant register requirement. And this is why I'm here, to highlight the critical work we have been doing and to urge this council to continue protecting and expanding city funding for immigrants serving organizations, especially in Staten Island. We are grateful for the support La Colmena has received in the past from this council. But the war is far from over. No, now is the time to stand with us again, because immigrant communities are currently under attack. If at federal level we cannot be supported, then we know we can count on you. Please don't forget about La Colmena. Please don't forget Staten Island. Please don't forget about my sister organizations. Thank you for your time and for your continued commitment.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair Ressler, Chair Brandon, and committee members present today for convening this necessary hearing and for the opportunity to provide testimony regarding recent changes in federal funding. Grand Street Settlement is a 109-year-old multi-service settlement house. We serve over 18,000 New Yorkers through vital early childhood, youth, and older adult programs on the Lower East Side, Manhattan, and the Bronx. Today, we are testifying about the importance of federal funding sources on Grand Street programs and how a funding reduction would negatively impact the communities we serve. We also urge city leaders to work in partnership with the current federal administration on behalf of community-based organizations to sustain the federal fundings our neighbors rely on. Nearly half of our operating budget is comprised of direct federal Head Start funding. Currently, Grand Street operates 8 programs that either receive direct or indirect federal Head Start funding. The funding allocated to Grand Street supports the academic and social emotional development of children. Really quickly, I want to highlight the benefits of Head Start. Head Start is a federally funded child care program supporting low-income families. Children from birth through kindergarten receive free subsidized, high-quality education, health screenings, nutritional support, alongside professional and personal support for parents, and much more. Statistics show that Head Start is one of the most successful programs that have came out of the Great Society era in the 60s. A study published in December 2022 in the Journal of Political Economy concluded that the Head Start program, or children who have attended the Head Start program, have higher levels of educational attainment, lower teen pregnancy rates, and less criminal engagement on average. As a recipient of federal direct and indirect Head Start funding from the Office of Head Start, the New York City Department of Education, we are deeply concerned about the potential cuts to the program. Cuts to our federal Head Start grant will have a dire generational impact on families who depend on Grand Street for high-quality early childhood education services. Grand Street and other child care providers throughout this country are now faced with funding cuts despite our record of providing robust child care services. For several years, Grand Street was lauded by parents, educational experts, and elected officials for our successful Head Start model. This January, Governor Kathy Hochul visited Grand Street and commended us on our early childhood education program and its life-changing impact on families. However, adequate federal funding is critical to continuing this work. With appropriate funding for the Office of Head Start, we can continue to disrupt systemic barriers that hinder children from excelling and becoming successful, contributing members of society. Other programs are at risk. For example, programs like Single Stop USA will be impacted by proposed funding cuts. Single Stop is a nationally renowned benefits assisted program that supports eligible individuals and families in accessing federal subsidized benefits such as SNAP and Medicaid. Our community relies on these programs like Single Stop to gain access to life-saving services. Funding for these resources equips Grant Street case managers with the resources needed to support our community. In closing, we encourage the City of New York to continue working with our federal administration to ensure that community-based organization and families have the funding that they need to support our communities. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you for your testimony. This council is certainly committed to working with you on that.
Good afternoon, Chairs Brennan and Ressler and members of the committee. My name is Brian Illicott Cook. I'm the Director of Government Relations at SAGE, and I'm here today with a clear message. The alarm bells are ringing. LGBTQ plus elders and elders living with HIV are under attack from a hostile federal government, issuing executive orders to dismantle so-called woke programs, to local budget proposals that threaten the very infrastructure of elder care. These are not hypotheticals. They are real, targeted, and already causing harm. Since January of 2025, the federal administration has cultivated an increasingly aggressive stance toward LGBTQ plus Americans. These attacks are not abstract. They are targeted, calculated, and already impacting the lives of LGBTQ plus elders. These funds supporting several of our core programs, our SAGE centers for older adults, and specialized initiatives like for our LGBT veterans, programs such as SAGE Positive, SAGE Vets, and SAGE Trans, all designed to meet the unique needs of LGBTQ plus older adults, are now being targeted over the guise of eliminating so-called DEI initiatives or woke programs. These efforts are further fueled by recent executive actions, including the executive orders that would seek to roll back protections under the pretense of combating gender ideology. We are deeply concerned as there is no clear sense of how these federal shifts may affect state and city-funded streams, or how they're being used to justify the cuts and programs that serve some of the most vulnerable members of our community. Most recently, we've also seen the proposals to eliminate the Federal Administration for Community Living, ACL, and it has raised alarms. Without ACL, programs that combat elder isolation, provide affirming care can vanish overnight. LGBTQ plus elders already experience disproportionate rates of poverty, discrimination, and isolation. Trans and non-binary elders, including veterans, are especially vulnerable to housing insecurity, medical neglect, and violence, especially now among an onslaught of anti-trans rhetoric and legislation. I want to read a quote from one of my staff members. He runs our long-term HIV survivors group, and he says, "Many participants remember when the government turned a blind eye to our community. We are once again in a moment where history threatens to repeat itself. And just then, we have communities who take care of each other, who rely on the support of our allies and loved ones, and we will continue to build towards a future where all LGBTQ plus elders are valued, supported, and can thrive." Taken together, both federal and local attacks threaten to unravel decades of progress, including a proposed $1.2 million cut to the New York City Department for Aging, which could shutter up to 60 older adult centers, which are lifelines for our community. 4 of those centers are run by SAGE. SAGE is one of the few organizations nationwide focused solely on the unique needs of queer elders. That's our mission. And these mounting threats, fiscal and ideological, jeopardize our ability to do our work.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chairs Brannon and Chair Ressler. It is really important to hold this hearing, and I'm really grateful that you have sort of brought us in to testify about this. My name is Kevin Koprovsky, and I'm the Director of Public Policy for Live On New York. We are an organization that represents over 100 aging service providers throughout the city. Our members do everything from run older adult centers, home delivered meals programs, case management programs, basically things that allow people to live healthy and live in their homes. Right now, the federal government has already dissolved ACL. To echo Brian's sentiments about that, ACL, the Administration for Community Living, disperses funds for the Older American Act programs, which are a lot of the programs in the city. So we've already seen huge cuts that we don't know what the impacts are going to be, but we're bracing for them, and we're trying to figure out what the best way to move forward is in that uncertainty. The other cuts that are being proposed by the federal government to Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, housing programs like Section 8 and SNAP will disproportionately affect older New Yorkers. Older New Yorkers are 20% of our population. And just for some numbers, Medicaid alone brings in $40 billion to the New York City area through coverage of people of all ages. Over 400,000 households in our city with an older adult rely on SNAP to meet their basic nutritional requirements. Over 1 million New Yorkers over the age of 65 receive Social Security benefits. Cuts to these programs seem almost specifically targeted to hurt older people and hurt older people in our city. We will see people who were born and raised in the city put out onto the street if these cuts go through. We will see people who have lived here for decades lose access to stable nutrition and lose access to their medical care. When it comes to older adult services, however, there is something that the city can do. Because the funding for a lot of DFTA's programming amounts to only 0.5% of the budget, any cuts to that will only amount to small amounts. So if the federal government were to cut all of the funding to DFTA, it's about 25% of DFTA's portfolio. The other 75% is city tax levy. It would only be about $120 million to keep services running as they are. And that's key because DFTA's portfolio is one of the only things that can mitigate the harms if the federal government decides to cut all of these programs. DFTA's portfolio allows meals to be delivered directly to people's homes and to be gotten in congregate settings, so we can give people some security on the food level. DFTA's programming connects people to services they may not know about both federally and otherwise, so we can ensure that if federal lines get cut, folks have access to private lines, to different charity lines, and ensuring that that works out the way it does. The first thing that I'm going to say is we can't cut the budget. The mayor has put a $102 million budget cut just for this year that will close up to 90 centers now. We've estimated it was 60, that's new. 90 centers now that we've estimated. And if they go through it, we're going to lose almost a third of the senior centers in the city. That just can't happen. Second, we've put together our Age Strong New York campaign that goes through housing, nutrition, and community services. It shows that with a $2.3 billion investment, we can prepare our city for aging. We are an aging city. We must recognize that. It's not a dirty thing. It's not a bad word. With proper investment, we can be a great city with a lot of older New Yorkers who can live here, stay here, and thrive. And lastly, we need to make sure older New Yorkers are part of every single story we tell. A recent Siena poll showed that 70% of all demographics think aging in place should be a top priority of whoever wants to be the next mayor, and 30% of those people across all demographics think it should be the top priority, second only to affordable housing. So we need to make sure that we are lifting the voices of the older New Yorkers in our city, not just for, people who are older now, but for us. Because if we are in the city and we are aging in the city, we need to create a place where we can be too. That's all I have to say. If you have any questions, please let me know. And again, thank you so much for this incredibly important opportunity to testify.
Thank you all. I just will say there are times when each of us chair hearings and we reach out to lots of organizations and advocates from across the city to beg them to come in to share their experience. I know you all have a lot going on. That was not what happened today. We sent out an email, just letting people know that this hearing was happening. And we've received this incredibly strong response because senior service organizations, settlement houses, immigrant serving organizations, everything in between are already experiencing shockwaves from federal grants that are disappearing, and we all can see that it's getting worse. So I'm deeply grateful that you all have taken the time among your very busy lives and with all the critical work that you do to share with us the specifics, because it makes Councilmember Shulman and Williams and Chair Brennan and myself and Councilmember Brewer in spirit stronger advocates, I know, and better champions for each of your needs. With that, I'll pass it to Councilmember Shulman, who I know has a question.
Yes, and before I get to my question, I want to thank Chairs Ressler and Brannon for holding this very important hearing today. I want to thank you. I am an older adult, so FYI, everybody. Yay. Brian, I wanted to ask you specifically, I keep hearing from LGBTQ plus organizations that they're getting cut, directly from the federal government. Are you aware of who they are and where they are?
So we're one of the organizations that was federally cut. We had an international program. We partnered up with older, LGBT adults across the world to share their stories, because unlike the United States of America, those stories are also not told. We've lost 2 staffers. We got one of those nasty federal letters that said, your funding is being terminated and it's because you're an LGBTQ plus organization. And we know others have as well. They tried to pause some of our older adult, our OAA money. We were able to file a lawsuit with Democracy Forward and pause that for some of the foreseeable future. But yes, we are seeing that directly at Sage and from others as well.
Because particularly as an older adult who is a member of the LGBTQ plus community, that's super important. And I think maybe if you guys can or get together with the other organizations and pull together a list of what's being cut directly versus some other things, I think that would be helpful to us as council members.
I think the coalition, one of the coalitions we sit on, I think Kat's here somewhere. Hi. We collect some of that information already, so I've heard from separate from this. I've heard from the Door. I've heard from GMHC. I've heard from a number of others that there's very deep cuts. And I would also say with the cuts, and I don't think I need to tell anybody this, that the people who do this work are usually also LGBTQ plus identified. So we are stressed, we are scared, we are sometimes multitasking, and that's something that the city should also try to assist with.
Okay, no, we're here for you. Thank you very much for your compelling testimony, and really appreciate it. And we'll see what we can figure out. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Schulman. We're going to move to the next panel. Thank you once again. Thank you, Councilmember Williams, for joining us and for your thoughtful questions. Jade Vasquez from Women in Need, Gina Capuchitti from New Destiny Housing Corp., Reverend Terry Troya from Project Hospitality, and Victoria Leahy from Homeless Services United. Next up, we'll do a Staten Island panel. Adrian Abadi from Staten Island Partnership for Community Wellbeing. Janet, oh no, I'm sorry, and nor does the Reverend Troya. Janet Magnuson, NPSI Richmond Homes Need Services Inc., Tatiana Arguello, Nonprofit SI, and Celestine Cox from Nonprofit SI. You will be up next. And with that, however you'd like to proceed.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chair Brannon, Chair Ressler, and members of the committees. My name is Jade Vasquez, and I'm the Director of Policy and Research at WIN, the largest provider of shelter and supportive housing for families with children in New York City and the nation. Each night, nearly 7,000 New Yorkers, including 3,600 children, call WIN home. As federal funding for housing, social services, and education faces unprecedented threats, our city must be prepared to fill these gaps to protect our most vulnerable residents. In January, WIN released Project Hope, which outlines steps city and state lawmakers can take to shield low-income immigrant and homeless New Yorkers from the extreme federal rollbacks proposed in Project 2025. In anticipation of massive federal cuts to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development workforce, the slashing of individual federal benefits like Section 8 and SNAP, the Trump administration's mass deportation efforts that are already underway, and its plans to eliminate the Department of Education, we urge the city to allocate an additional $263 million to city FEPs to serve approximately 10,000 households at risk of losing their Section 8 voucher. To allocate funding in the FY26 budget to supplement the SNAP program, invest $10 million in direct cash transfer programs serving high-risk populations, including families with children, youth, and single adults experiencing housing instability or homelessness, like it did last year with the $1.5 million investment to the Bridge Project. Increase the city's share of funding for immigration legal services to $80 million and direct these funds to experienced nonprofit immigration legal service providers. Allocate an additional $17 million in funding for the NYC DOE Office of Students in Temporary Housing to increase the number of shelter-based community coordinators. Improve and invest additional resources in school transportation for students in temporary housing. And lastly, to renew the $200 million in funding for early childhood education, including 3K, preschool education, and Promise NYC, set to expire in June 2025, and commit to covering the cost of any Head Start seats lost due to the Trump administration cuts. Federal cuts are already hitting us. FEMA food aid losses have impacted our families and our shelters. The threats to HUD, SNAP, education, and legal protections is real and growing, and New York City has the resources. It also has the responsibility, and we urge the city to step up now and invest in the supports low-income families need to survive and succeed. Thank you for your time and leadership.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Chair Brennan, Chair Ressler, and Council Central staff. Thank you for holding this hearing and for the opportunity to testify on behalf of New Destiny Housing. My name is Gina Capociti, and I'm the Senior Director of Housing Access and Stability Services at New Destiny. New Destiny is the only organization in New York City that's 100% focused on permanent housing for survivors of domestic violence. We do this work because domestic violence is the number one cause of family homelessness in our city. And for survivors, housing is a matter of life and death. Yet the federal government is threatening vital housing programs for survivors. In 2019, New Destiny implemented the first federally funded rapid rehousing program for survivors in New York City, Housing Link. In 2022, New Destiny added a second rapid rehousing program dedicated to survivors with housing vouchers. At any given time, we are serving over 300 households experiencing domestic violence across these two contracts. These programs are funded by HUD via the New York City Continuum of Care, or COC, providing survivors with housing navigation services, temporary rental assistance, and supportive services to promote long-term housing stability. Like other COC programs, New Destiny's rapid rehousing programs are a lifeline for survivors. So we are concerned about the future of these contracts and HUD's ability to manage these contracts if the proposed staffing cuts are effectuated. New Destiny is also deeply concerned with the ending of the emergency housing vouchers, or EHV. The federal government notified agencies in March that funding for the program is ending this year. Nearly 8,000 households in New York depend on this vital housing resource, including nearly 1,700 domestic violence survivors. New Destiny housed nearly half of these survivors, and since then we maintain contact through our aftercare services, and we know these survivors and many others who are vulnerable will return to homelessness or to abusive partners if they are to lose their voucher too soon. While we are pushing for Congress to allocate federal funding to sustain the HV program into 2026 and years later, HPD and NYCHA must plan for contingencies to ensure these New Yorkers remain stably housed. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. Reverend Troy.
Hi, I'm Terry Troy, and I work with hungry and homeless people in Staten Island. I'm also representing today the Staten Island Hunger Task Force and the Supportive Housing Network of New York. The cuts to Medicaid and SNAP are the most devastating federal actions that our city faces, and that will result in massive hunger and lack of access to health care for people who depend on Medicaid, especially our disabled populations, and will increase illness, untreated illness, and unnecessary death for many, many New Yorkers. As well, the cuts to Section 8 and other HUD vouchers will lead to massive homelessness in our city. Let's talk hunger first. The federal government has frozen the Emergency Food and Shelter Program, EFSP, which provides funds to purchase emergency food, and TFAP, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, from the federal Farm Bill legislation, which provides buying power of basic foodstuffs for food pantries in New York City. Buying power of foodstuffs like beans, pasta, rice, canned vegetables, nothing fancy like meat and milk. These cuts are now devastating the city's emergency food pantry networks, including Project Hospitality, which provides 4 million, or 50% of the 8 million emergency meals provided by pantries on Staten Island. Now let's talk about homelessness. FEMA funds stabilization beds for homeless people in the city of New York, including on Staten Island. FEMA funds homeless street outreach for all of the city's 5 boroughs, including Staten Island, where we have 2 people 24 hours a day that respond to 311 calls across Staten Island, including our South Shore, in order to address the needs of homeless people living in encampments on our streets. SAMHSA cuts will affect us on Staten Island by eliminating a mental health, 1 psychiatrist and 1 social worker program that we've had since 1992 that does mental health screening of all homeless people that come to our drop-in center or through our outreach programs on Staten Island before they're placed in church-based shelters. We are still the only borough in the city of New York that has respite beds in churches because we don't really have homeless beds for Staten Islanders. HUD cuts in the continuum of care domain will threaten the closure of 115 supportive apartments for homeless Staten Islanders. We were already ordered to close on March 14th 3 apartments by March 31st. And we did it, and we moved people. But where are we going to put the other 112 people who are disabled and formerly homeless Staten Islanders in our borough in the next months when we're told to close the rest of the units? What neighborhoods will they settle in, and where will they set up their encampments? Nobody asks these questions. We are also dealing with federal cuts by creating and decimating hunger in our safety net. We are creating federal cuts now that in a time when we have the highest rent in New York City housing history, and at the time where we have the highest number of homeless people on the streets of New York, including in the borough of Staten Island. This is not humane. It is not helpful. It is not right, and we are putting the lives of the most vulnerable people in our city at risk for death. The elimination of these federal dollars will result in profound human suffering, and we need to stop it.
Thank you, Reverend Troy.
Good afternoon. My name is Victoria Leahy. I am the Director of Policy and Planning at Homeless Services United. I'd like to thank Chair Brannon and Chair Ressler and the rest of the committee for the opportunity to testify today. As we heard, there's a vital housing program that's going to be at risk with these federal funding cuts. We're projecting cuts to Section 8, the complete ending of the emergency housing voucher program, and cuts to TANF, all which are central to funding the homeless shelter system and homeless services here in New York City. It's also crucial to remember that not just federal pass-through dollars are at risk. As we've heard today, many providers contract directly with the federal government. Our members, based off of a survey, up to 22% of their operating budgets come from direct federal contracts. The reported funding cuts and staff cuts, not just to HUD, but other agencies, will only cause further interruptions in their ability to provide services. Providers have mentioned how federal funding cuts are already impacting their programming. We've seen cuts to the Emergency Food and Shelter Program, which have caused providers to either limit their rental assistance programs that keep families in their home or cut their food service programs. And it's not just specific to HUD and FEMA. We see this through the Department of Labor, through Medicaid, through the VA, and other agencies. And so all of this together, members are having a really extremely difficult time amending their fiscal plans and trying to figure out which programming to keep and what to cut back. What is also troubling is the programmatic implications that come now with contracting with the federal government. As providers have seen with their continuum of care contracts and their ability to renew them, the federal government is adding programmatic implications into those contract renewals. And so providers are now at a very troubling time where they're deciding to accept these federal restrictions on their ability to provide services or to cut that federal funding and decide whether or not they need to reduce their staff size, reduce their programming, or risk their ability to stay open altogether. As HSU has mentioned before, providers are in a cash flow crisis due to chronic late payments. There's a total lack of normalcy when it comes to city payments on their contracts for services provided. Federal contracts have always been reportedly amongst our members the most consistent in paying providers on time. While providers may wait months on end for their city payments, federal funds help keep their doors open. Given the uncertainty of federal resources and these proposed cuts, it's all the more important right now that the city registers contracts in a timely manner and pays nonprofit homeless service providers for their services on time to not further threaten their insolvency. We join the many other nonprofit providers today in making the following recommendations. Expedite all late contract payments to human service providers. It is the most important thing that the city can do to keep these homeless service providers open right now. The city should work on its strategic plan to draw down federal funding that it's used to to operate these contracts. And lastly, the city and state must work on a comprehensive counter strategy to the anticipated mass cuts to federal funding, especially in the human service sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate you all being here today and for your thoughtful testimony. Thank you so much. And while I am calling the next panel a Staten Island panel, just want to note we've had Staten Island residents on each of the previous two panels, and we will on the following panel as well. So Staten Island has shown up today. It's not the Forgotten Island. So Adrian Abate from Staten Island Partnership for Community Wellbeing, Janet Magnuson from NPSI, Richmond Home Needs Services, Tatiana Arguello, from Nonprofit SI, Celestine Cox from Nonprofit SI. Thank you for being with us. And following that, Justin Wood from Staten Island and NILPI will be with us. Then Hannah Lupian, Met Council, Naima Dahir from the Arab American Family Sports Center, based in the 33rd, and Dr. Sophine Charles from KOFCA. Thank you very much, and feel free to begin in whichever order you'd like.
I'm already not following the rules. Good morning, or good afternoon now. My name is Adrienne Abadi, and I'm the Executive Director of Partnerships for Community Wellness, a public health nonprofit working to reduce health disparities on Staten Island. I want to thank the members of the committees for this opportunity to submit testimony. PCW's work is rooted in the understanding that complex public health issues are decades in the making and require the coordinated efforts and resources of multiple sectors. Our initiatives focus on youth behavioral health, chronic disease prevention, maternal health, and child wellness. For over 20 years, we've been working to ensure resources and critical public health programs are scaled to Staten Island communities most impacted by health disparities. 70% of our budget is made up of government contracts, including direct federal contracts with the CDC and SAMHSA and federal pass-through awards from the state, including the SAPT block grants. We also hold city contracts. Shortly after the executive orders were issued in January, attacking core tenets of public health and the mission of our agency, we received a stop work order for our CDC award to support LGBTQ and BIPOC youth, and the termination of 2 of our state pass-through contracts. Luckily, court injunctions have allowed us to continue the work temporarily. These actions by the federal government directly undermine the health and well-being of Staten Islanders and threaten to dismantle the vital public health infrastructure that our organization and other community groups have worked tirelessly to build. Nonprofit organizations often provide public goods and services to address gaps when government falls short, and nonprofits on Staten Island have had to shoulder that burden more than any of the other New York City boroughs. Despite Staten Island often leading the city in overdose rates, maternal mortality rates, incidence of cardiovascular disease, cancer burden, and the lowest childhood vaccinations, we have neither an H&H public hospital nor a Department of Health and Mental Hygiene Health Action Center, despite decades of advocacy. This chronic underinvestment in Staten Island's public health infrastructure makes the current threat of federal funding cuts all the more devastating. I urge the City Council to strategically allocate funds to offset these anticipated federal shortfalls. Furthermore, I urge the City Council to ensure that nonprofits serving marginalized groups or addressing issues not aligned with current federal policies are protected from any punitive measures. We're experiencing a situation where our missions have become criminalized. Our organizations must continue to receive the support they need to serve our communities effectively, and the City Council has a critical role in protecting the health of the New York City residents, and we stand ready to partner with you in this effort. Thank you for your time and support in this critical matter.
Thank you very much, Ms. Abadi.
Good morning, all. Thank you to the chairs and the members of the committee. My name is Janet Magnuson. I am currently CEO of Richmond Home Need Services. We're a nonprofit licensed home care service agency on Staten Island. We service Staten Island and all the other boroughs. Today I stand with my sister organizations to address the pressing issue of underfunding and cuts on Staten Island as a whole, with particular attention to the older adult population in our borough. The population of adults age 65 and older in New York City has grown significantly over the past 2 decades. And on Staten Island, 12% of seniors live below the poverty line, which matches the rate across New York City as a whole. There also exists a significant gap affecting seniors who do not qualify for Medicaid and yet lack the financial means to afford basic necessities. As a result, many are forced to go without adequate nutrition and essential medical and home care. Despite this, Staten Island continues to face significant underfunding and real-time cuts, which has created barriers that prevent us from meeting their essential needs. These challenges include limited access to health care, as Staten Island lacks a public hospital and is limited to just one city-funded clinic. The absence of public geriatric specialty services further compounds the problem. Inadequate support for daily living as essential services such as meal delivery, transportation, and home care are grossly underfunded. Staten Island Staten Island's funding for these critical supports falls behind other boroughs, leaving vulnerable seniors without the assistance they need. Increased social isolation. With only 4 city-funded older adults sent out of approximately 300 citywide, Staten Islanders seniors face a lack of opportunities for community engagement. Funding cuts for these vital supports affect mental and physical health, along with chronic disease management, leading to worsening health conditions and more frequent hospitalization, costing more in the long run. Under the current New York City Aging Funding Framework, our agency is limited to supporting only 100 older adults, restricted to a maximum of 20 hours per client each week, forcing new clients to be waitlisted far too often. And this existing funding is wholly inadequate to address the growing needs of Staten Island. Increases should go hand in hand with Medicaid, and currently they do not, leaving New York City aging and community agencies to fight year after year for funding. Now, I spoke a bit about city funding and the fact that Staten Island is currently underfunded because of the fear that the trickle down from the federal will go down to the city and state, and Staten Island cannot afford more cuts. However, with regard to the discussion at hand, we also provide services to those in need of all ages through Medicaid funding. After a January 1st state-mandated wage increase, home health aides now make $19.10, and they deserve it, and they deserve more. We did get our expected reimbursement rates from managed long-term care and Medicaid. However, in the beginning of January, we started to receive letters from managed long-term care companies that we will now face cuts, non-negotiable cuts, some close to 5%, without due process, without reasoning behind the cuts. So clearly this haphazardness of all of it is trickling down without rhyme or reason, and we know it is only the start. We also have a culturally diverse workforce, with many working on legal visas. But I hear and I feel the fear, with some too scared to come to work.
Right.
Now that not only affects their income, it affects our services that the clients desperately need.
Thanks so much. Just ask if you could wrap up. Feel free to
I'm almost done. I was just going to say, our agency's operations will be severely affected, and more importantly, those will be. And I can clearly see that the committee recognizes these pressing challenges and reminds all that investments, whether in culture, arts, immigration, older adults, or those with special needs, they're vital for communities' growth and sustainability. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Good morning, Chair Brennan and Chair Resler and the members of the committees. Thank you for hosting this timely hearing. My name is Tatiana Arguello, and I am the Executive Director of Nonprofit Staten Island. We are the hub for community-based organizations serving one of the most underfunded boroughs, Staten Island, serving organizations working on the front line of care, equity, and crisis response in Staten Island. Today, I'm not speaking just for myself, but for a growing network of more than 150 Staten Island nonprofits, and for the thousands of residents they serve every single day, children, older adults, immigrants, and families working hard to survive. We submitted our full written testimony with all the data points because I don't want to bore you, but the bottom line is that we are underfunded and we need more services for our children and families, for immigration services, for our senior care, and for our healthcare services on Staten Island. And that is why I'm here today supporting our organ members that are testifying. We're not asking for special treatment, but for support. We make up 6% of the city's population, but last year we received only 2% of the city speakers fund on Staten Island. Our organization being the one of those organizations that were cut last year. We lost 10% of our budget in fiscal year 25. As a borough, we were left off of multiple citywide initiatives and major funding portfolios. Despite deep need and a rapid changing population, we are bracing for another hit. We are hearing warnings about federal cuts, and we are already seeing them at play. Programs are scaling back, services are shrinking, frontline providers are stretched to the brick. We're operating with less, serving more, and holding the line for the city's most vulnerable. We are not only serving Staten Island residents, but also many Brooklyn, Bronx, Manhattan, Queens residents as well, who come to Staten Island and pay the toll in other ways for our services. This moment is not theoretical for us. It's real. And if city dollars are distributed inequitably now, we are terrified of what federal reductions will mean for our borough that is already left behind. We know that there is need citywide, and we stand with our colleagues citywide, but we want to remind you that we are here and that we are doing incredible work on Staten Island, and that there is a gap between the need and investment that is growing. We cannot afford to fall further. We are here to be seen, heard, and invested on. As Staten Island's nonprofit ambassador, I'm asking the council to work with us to fix what's broken, to ensure that Staten Island is not forgotten. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Celestine Cox, and I am the Director of Membership with Nonprofit Staten Island. I would like to defer my time to one of our member organizations who did sign up to testify. That is Staten Island Museum, who will be represented by Janice Monger.
Sure. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Greetings, Chair Brannon, Chair Ressler, committee members. Thank you for yielding. I'm here today to express serious concern over the state of federal arts and culture funding impacting New York City cultural organizations, and here in solidarity with my Staten Island nonprofit organizations. As the CEO of the Staten Island Museum, I want to share our story to demonstrate the impact of these devastating cuts and changes to federal arts agencies, including the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Arts organizations like the Staten Island Museum depend on federal funds to fulfill our mission, serve New Yorkers, and preserve and care for U.S. cultural heritage. On a good day, federal funding is difficult to secure and highly competitive. The federal process requires advanced planning, rigorous applications, and several months wait period before award notification. When successful, federal funding enables the museum to undertake collections, processing, and digitizing projects, provide school programs for free, and bring scholarly input into our exhibitions. In late 2024, the Staten Island Museum was awarded a 3-year grant totaling more than $300,000 through the Save America's Treasures program. As of April 9th, 10:29 p.m., we received an email from Keith Sonderling, the acting director at the IMLS, that the grant has been terminated. There is approximately $250,000 remaining on this grant. These are congressionally appropriated funds, and this was part of a round of several hundreds of such notifications. Staten Island Museum's operating budget is about $2.5 million, so this represents significant grant funding to carry out our mission. Federal funding freezing and agency staff layoffs that have been referenced earlier, where all these agency staff have been placed on administrative leave, have created uncertainty around another allocated grant of $250,000 through IMLS to facilitate stewardship of Native American artifacts. Additionally, SIM has pending requests to NEH and NEA totaling about $500,000, and some of those notifications were to come as early as this month. 80% of NEH staff have been laid off. The entire IMLS staff has been put on 90-day administrative leave. Federal cultural funding is essential to the success of the Staten Island Museum and so many cultural institutions. So I know that there are a host of major issues on the table, but you need to understand this is happening in the cultural sector much the same way as other sectors. And I hope that New York City Council members are aware of the tremendous strain that these federal cuts put on the city's cultural organizations. So thank you to your attention on this matter and so many others, and for New York City's investment in the cultural institutions that make New York City great. We're counting on you. Thank you very much.
I really appreciate the thoughtful testimony, the collective Staten Island advocacy, and I would say that your voices are more important and influential than anybody else in New York City right now, because you all and my friend, Councilmember Brannon, have the unique status of being represented by a Republican in Congress. And so your influence with your Congress member in a scenario where there's a 3-vote majority in the House, has the potential to protect not just the great work you're doing on Staten Island, but the great work that's happening across the city of New York. So anything that we can do to help support that advocacy, partner with you together to ensure that we're breaking through with Congresswoman Malliotakis as effectively as possible. You can count on the council as partners. I just will ask, are there any conversations you can share to date? I know, Ms. Abadi, you've been doing thoughtful advocacy on your issues for many years. I'm a long admirer of your work. Really pleased to learn more about the nonprofit coalition that you're all building in Staten Island, great cultural institutions. It's great that you're all well established. But is there any insight you can share on the advocacy or conversations to date with Congressmember Malliotakis, or ways in which the council can be helpful or supportive in those efforts?
Sure. So one of the coalitions that my organization supports is TISA, which is a behavioral health coalition, and Congressmember Malliotakis has been involved in some of the work of the coalition, so we had requested a meeting. We haven't met with her in person. So we met with her legislative director to talk about some of the issues, and we did an exhaustive survey of how federal cuts are impacting the behavioral health sector, how many people are being reached, Pride Center, we're talking about all the different marginalized groups. They are taking it into account, but we have yet to have an in-person meeting.
Well, I think she's been one of the dozen or so Republican members in Congress that has spoken up most about the risks of and the impacts of the Medicaid cuts. And I think your direct advocacy as leaders in your communities is going to really matter in the months to come. And so just want to thank you for being here today. Thank you for your ongoing efforts. And please, very sincerely, let us know how we can help. And I think Councilmember Schulman has a question as well.
I also want to make a suggestion that maybe you try to set up a meeting with the minority leader, Joanne Ariola, because she has access to Malliotakis as well, and she might be able to be helpful. And I've talked to her about some of the cuts as well, and so she has listened, and she serves with me on the health committee and all of that, but I want to make that suggestion.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today. Hope it's a easy ferry ride home. Next up, Justin Wood, another from NILPI, Hannah Lupian from Met Council, Naima Dahir from Arab American Family Support Center in the 33rd, and Dr. Sophie Charles from Kafka. The following panel will be, just so everybody's ready and excited, Sabrina Hargrave from Brooklyn.org, Haley Nolasco from the Center for Justice Innovation, Philip Duncan from NIMIC, Northern Manhattan Improvement Corporation, and Rosalind Black from Legal Services of New York City. Feel free to testify in whatever order you all are so moved.
Hello. Thank you so much, Chair Brannon, Chair Ressler, Councilmember Schulman, and members of the council staff for the opportunity to testify. My name is Justin Wood. I'm the Director of Policy at New York Lawyers for the Public Interest. I am also a Staten Islander. It's great to see so many neighbors here, but I'm testifying about citywide issues today. We are an almost 50-year-old civil rights legal organization with active programs in disability justice, health justice, environmental justice, and we operate a pro bono clearinghouse that directly connects impacted community clients and grassroots organizations with pro bono legal services from the private bar. I'll shorten my testimony. We've heard so much about the devastating impact that's actually happening. The threats are having an effect, but the actual cuts and atmosphere of fear is having a devastating effect on New York City communities that can least afford this type of austerity and fear. We and the nonprofit sector we work with are responding, and we're deeply grateful for the partnership to date with the City Council. It's disappointing the administration didn't show up today to talk about this. We're deeply thankful for the investments the council has made to date in initiatives that are from your discretion, your body's discretionary funding, like the Immigrant Health Initiative. We are respectfully asking for an enhancement this year. The immigration and medical cases that we take through our health justice program and our medical providers network are increasing in number, increasing in urgency, increasing in complexity because of all the fear and direct cuts and fear of accessing basic services and need for immigration services we've heard so much about today. So we respectfully put that before the committee and on the record. Secondly, we've formed a rapid nonprofit defense network since President Trump's inauguration. And sad to say, that is more needed than ever. We've heard from so many nonprofits today about what's actually happening. These things are real. Organizations really are receiving threats from agencies like FEMA and others because they've provided food to immigrant communities or just to all New Yorkers, regardless of background. So that's actually happening. I wanted in the final 30 seconds just to mention another topic, which is we want to continue working with the council on legislative and implementation campaigns that can help assure New York State and cities' independence financially from the federal government as much as possible in this atmosphere. So just to name a few of the wins, congestion pricing has been a win-win that has secured billions of dollars in capital funding for the MTA. We've worked on the accessibility components of that with you. And that's something that hopefully we can do independent of the federal government. There are other things at the state level, like the overdue cap and invest program that should be generating $3 to $6 billion minimum in investment funds at the state level while bringing down greenhouse gas and local air pollution that the governor hasn't released. We would love to partner with the council in raising one unified voice and demanding that those solutions be advanced this year. So we're excited to do that things. We're really excited about initiatives the council has announced, like the Local Law 97 compliance initiative. Again, these are things that maximize our economic job creation in New York City and do necessary environmental justice and climate work, and we think are very effective in terms of revenue. So I'll leave it there. We'll submit a longer statement. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Ressler, Chair Brennan, and Councilmember Schulman, and all the other council members who were here earlier. Thank you so much for holding this hearing today. My name is Hannah Lupian, and I'm the Managing Director of Food Programs at the Met Council on Jewish Poverty. Met Council operates the largest kosher and halal food pantry network in the country and provides a wide array of support to over 320,000 New Yorkers annually. In the face of recent funding cuts at the federal level and with more on the horizon, we and our partners at Catholic Charities, who you heard from earlier today, as well as Hispanic Federation, urgently request that City Council allocate $20 million in emergency funding for food pantries, similar to what was allocated at the onset of the COVID pandemic. This funding will allow us to deploy needed resources to areas with limited pantry and social service infrastructure, as well as to communities with religiously informed or culturally nuanced diets that are not part of the traditional emergency food system, and to programs that facilitate increased access to emergency food. Additionally, we want to express our support for the Council's decision to call on the administration to baseline fund Community Food Connection, CFC, at $100 million a year. New Yorkers observing religiously informed diets will go without food if the emergency food system does not provide appropriate products. Met Council works hard to meet the food needs of all New Yorkers by providing both kosher and halal observant food assistance to anyone who comes to our pantries. Met Council's ability to provide kosher and halal food to hungry New Yorkers is directly tied to funding from the federal government, and I'd like to speak to two programs that have not yet been mentioned today. The Local Food Purchase Assistance Program and the Emergency Food Assistance Program provide incredibly important support, both in cash that we can use to purchase kosher and halal foods not otherwise available through public streams, and the second, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, in-kind food administered by OGS at the state level to provide basics like rice, dried beans, and limited fresh produce to New Yorkers of all stripes. And finally, the Emergency Food and Shelter Program through FEMA. All three of these programs enable Met Council to distribute millions of pounds of food every year. They have, all three of the programs have already faced cuts or freezes in funding just in the recent weeks. These cuts directly impact our ability to serve New Yorkers the foods that meet their needs. It is now more vital than ever that City Council steps in to help fill the gap left by these federal cuts and to support the programs that serve hungry New Yorkers. The decisions made by this committee will impact the lives of millions of our neighbors. By allocating that $20 million of funding for emergency food pantries and funding CFC at a baseline of $100 million, this committee will support emergency food providers during a time of immense uncertainty and benefit all food insecure New Yorkers, including those with religiously informed dietary restrictions. We thank you for your time today, and we hope to continue to work with this committee and City Council to fight food insecurity.
Thank you so much, and I just want to acknowledge we are joined online by the great Pierina Sanchez from the Bronx.
Great. Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Sophine Charles. I'm representing the Council of Family and Child Caring Agencies. We serve as the principal representative of all nonprofit agencies that provide foster care, adoption services, family preservation, and juvenile justice services in the state of New York. We have over 100 members across the state, varying in sizes, from small to very large multi-services organizations. In New York City, we have more than 50 of our members who are providing services through the administration of children's services, delivering child welfare services. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. And I want to begin by just saying that the federal government has historically served as a critical fiscal partner to our New York City nonprofits, both through direct and federal contracts and by city pass-through funding streams. In many cases, nonprofits were able to promptly access payments, and those payments have been instrumental in helping to sustain our program operations on the child welfare side. The late payments, as you know, is creating a hardship for our agencies, making it very difficult for them to keep their doors open, operate programs, and meet payroll obligations. We have, according to the Human Services Coalition, 90% of nonprofits report delays, and approximately in payments, $365 million, making it nearly impossible to sustain our programs. And want to make sure that you really understand that the silence coming from our government partners is deafening. Deafening in the sense that there's an absence of collaborative preparation for our nonprofits, and we really need to have those collaborative conversations to help us begin to plan for the federal cuts that are here and those that are coming. And the impact of federal budget cuts on nonprofits. The challenges extend beyond the financial difficulties. It's important to understand that many of our agencies are now spending time creating checklists, tracking their federal cuts, looking at working with their board of directors, trying to figure out what are the worst case scenarios. So a lot of time and resources spent into looking at that. We found out recently that the closing of the Administration for Children and Families regional offices have been closed in New York. So that means that our agencies that have federal contracts no longer get the technical assistance and cannot receive information that will allow them to continue their operations successfully and being compliant. And another one is the diversity, equity, and inclusion executive orders. Many of our agencies are spending time scrubbing websites and trying to make sure their material is absent of anything that will hamper funding coming into their agencies. And wrapping it up, I'd just like to say that the impact on the workforce, remember our nonprofits are employers, and so many of the staff, we're looking at something like 75% staff of color, 70% staff of women. So those cuts are going to decimate our workforce on the nonprofit side. So we want to make sure that there's collaboration with our city government partners to strategize around how we're going to plan to absorb the cuts that are coming. And lastly is our agencies are providing services to immigrant families. And these families are gone underground. They're gone into hiding. And our caseworkers are now scrambling, trying to come up with plans for those immigrant families that are facing deportation, and that means that the city is going to have to absorb funding to take care of those migrant children if their parents are deported. And so we're submitting written testimony in full, with full details. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Exceptionally insightful testimony. Thank you so much, Dr. Charles.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Naima Dahir, and I'm here on behalf of the Arab American Family Support Center. The Arab American Family Support Center provides trauma-informed, culturally competent services to over 20,000 individuals annually from Arab, Middle Eastern, Muslim, South Asian, and other immigrant communities across New York City. Today, I am here with an urgent request. Community-based organizations like AAFSC need your immediate support to continue serving some of our most vulnerable New Yorkers. Due to anticipated federal funding cuts, including reduction to the Office of Violence Against Women, we are facing a potential shortfall of $1.1 million. This directly threatens our domestic violence case management and our mental health services, programs that are life-saving. If this funding disappears, we may have to furlough 14 staff members and reduce support for over 4,000 survivors of domestic and gender-based violence. At the same time, need is rising dramatically. Since inauguration date, we've seen an 80% increase in mental health referrals and a 20% increase in legal service requests. Our clients are terrified, our students are afraid to leave shelters, families are opting out of benefits like food stamps due to fear of enforcement. Recent federal actions, revoking temporary protection status, fast-tracking deportations, and mandating surveillance of undocumented individuals are deliberately targeting our communities. In response, we've expanded our services, strengthened safety protocol, and trained our staff for potential ICE encounters. But we are operating without financial safety net. This work is urgent and underfunded. As members of New York City City Council, you are uniquely positioned to protect community-based organizations like the Arab American Family Support Center and the communities we serve. We urgently need the city's support to sustain our critical programming, especially our high-risk services such as our domestic violence case management and our mental health support, which are essential to meet the growing need of our immigrant communities and our communities of color. In addition to our full slate of FY 2026 funding requests, we want to underscore the urgent need to increase funding for programs that are at risk due to anticipated federal funding cuts, which, like I mentioned, are our anti-violence program and our SNAP enrollment program. To this end, we respectfully request an increase to $400,000 for our anti-violence program through DOVE funding, an increase to $150,000 for our SNAP enrollment program to offset any anticipated federal funding cuts and reductions we may see, and a renewal of $150,000 for our mental health initiative, and our first-time investment of $85,000 for our immigrant support initiative. Now is the time for bold action. Our community members are scared, our resources are spread thin, and the challenges ahead are immense. Thank you so much for your partnership and allowing me to testify today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That was a great panel. Really appreciate your testimony and your thoughtfulness and your time. Okay, we have two more in-person panels, then we're going to shift to a hybrid one. Next up, Sabrina Hargrave from Brooklyn.org, Haley Nolasco from the Center for Justice Innovation, Philip Duncan from NIMIC, and Rosalind Black from Legal Services NYC. Following that distinguished panel, we will hear from Kate Tishas, maybe, from the Collective Public Affairs, Joni Billy from Power Play NYC, Yesenia Mata from La Colmena, and I struggled there, and Emma Basir from City Meals on Wheels. Thank you. And feel free to begin.
Now I can. Hi. Good morning. Or afternoon. We're in the afternoon. Good afternoon, Chairs Brandon Ressler, members of the Committees of Finance and Governmental Operations. My name is Sabrina Hargrave, and I'm Vice President of Programs at Brooklyn.org, a partner and platform for local philanthropy supporting Brooklyn's nonprofits by giving everyone a part to play in creating change from the ground up. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. Brooklyn's rich diversity makes it a true microcosm of New York City and thus a powerful lens through which to understand the impacts already being felt in our communities by an arbitrary halt of federal funding to the city's nonprofits. From legal aid providers safeguarding constitutional due process rights to community organizers supporting our most vulnerable neighbors, Brooklyn's nonprofit sector has increasingly shouldered responsibilities that fundamentally belong to government, while being forced to do more with ever-dwindling resources. As you've heard today, we're witnessing alarming consequences of the current political climate. Surging demands for mental health services, vulnerable community members too fearful to collect weekly groceries from food pantry, residents missing critical medical appointments, and children withdrawing from supportive youth programs that provide essential stability. As federal funding faces unprecedented volatility, our city must recognize that when we outsource essential public services to nonprofits, we inherit an obligation to ensure their financial stability. When New York City delegates its fundamental duties to community organizations, it must follow through with sustainable funding, not as charity, but as fundamental of its core responsibility to the residents of Brooklyn and beyond. Today, nonprofits need reassurance that they will have the resources to operate. Our role at Brooklyn Org is to stand firm, provide stability, and mobilize greater support in this moment of crisis. We are committed to working relentlessly to serve as a counterweight to the chaos. We will work to galvanize donors and stakeholders to increase their giving and funding nonprofits at higher levels to close the gaps that the federal government creates. However, this cannot be our burden alone. The city must embrace its role as a true partner, matching our commitment with meaningful fiscal support and policy action that recognizes nonprofits not as vendors, but as essential collaborators in meeting our shared obligation to our communities. Again, I thank committee chairs and members for the opportunity to stand here before you today.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. It's good to see you, Haley.
Good to see you, too. Good afternoon, Chairs Brannon and Ressler, Councilmember Shulman, and esteemed members of the Committees on Finance and Governmental Operations, State and Federal Legislation. My name is Haley Nolasco, Senior Director of Government Relations at the Center for Justice Innovation. Again, thank you for the opportunity to testify. It is critical that we develop a strategic plan to protect the essential programs that meet basic human needs. Each year, thousands of New Yorkers struggling with substance abuse, mental illness, and housing insecurity cycle through our legal system. Traditional responses like over-policing and incarceration often ignore the root causes of crime, trapping individuals in a revolving door. Community-based alternatives, both in the community and within systems, enhance public safety and transform lives, yet many of our programs are not at risk. Project Reset, for example, diverts individuals charged with low-level offenses into counseling, housing support, and job training, often before they set foot in a courtroom. For those with more complex needs, our mental health courts in Brooklyn and Manhattan offer structural support instead of jail. The impact is clear. In 2024, 82% of felony ATI participants completed their programs, 95% of participants in Manhattan felony ATI program avoided a felony conviction, Brooklyn mental health court participants saw a 17% reduction in the likelihood of reconviction. Last year, Project Reset diverted 5,500 cases from court with a 96% attendance rate. These life-changing outcomes rest on federal grants and allocations that are now at risk. Should cuts to federal funding take effect, we'll be forced to scale back critical services, reducing slots in treatment programs, eliminating outreach staff, and curtailing supervision capacity. Fewer treatment referrals mean more people cycling back into the system. Fewer case managers mean less accountability and higher likelihood of rearrest. In short, cuts to our programs will not only harm vulnerable individuals, but also undermine public safety across our city. As we move towards the closure of Rikers, we must not turn to costly and ineffective incarceration. So we urge you to invest in proven community-based solutions to help close any gaps created by federal funding losses. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rosalind Black, the Citywide Housing Director at Legal Services NYC, and I'm joined by Philip Duncan, the Assistant Director of Housing at NYMIC Legal Services. Thank you for holding this hearing and allowing us to testify on behalf of a group of legal services providers that also includes Brooklyn Legal Services Corp. A, Housing Conservation Coordinators, Mobilization for Justice, Neighborhood Defender Service, New York Legal Assistance Group, and the Legal Aid Society. We're here to discuss the important free legal services that we provide to low-income New Yorkers under the Right to Counsel, RTC, and anti-harassment and tenant protection programs, that's known as AHTP, programs that are administered by the Department of Social Services and rely in large part on federal funding to protect vulnerable New York City residents. Although precise details of the federal funds used by these programs can be hard to decipher, the City Controller's Office reported in December of 2024 that $47 million of the $112 million, which is 42%, that the city uses for access to council is paid for with the TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Funds Block Grant, funds from the federal government. In addition, the Office of Civil Justice federal FY25 budget shows that of the $158 million for the Right to Counsel program, 30% of that comes from the federal government, and for the AHTP program, 4% comes from the federal government. The state controller also noted that $16 million of the money used for Right to Counsel this year is subject to an unspecified federal funding fiscal cliff, meaning that it relies on federal money that is not recurring. While there have been no specific threats to abolish the TANF block grant yet, during the prior Trump administration, there were calls to reduce it by 10%, and it's been flat since 1996, resulting in an effective reduction of 50% spending power. In addition, recent shifts in federal policy and DOGE activity have raised concerns about the sustainability of financial support for legal services overall. We're aware of the cuts to legal services for unaccompanied immigrant children. We've also maybe have heard DOGE as of this week has reached out to the Vera Institute and indicated it intends to investigate all nonprofit providers receiving federal funds. In addition, it was reported that the Legal Services Corporation, which administers and provides federal legal services nationally, which makes up 15% of our agency's budget, they were in a meeting with DOGE just this week. Other people have talked about, those federal funds are the stable funds that allow us to keep our agencies afloat and meet payroll in light of the city's inability to reimburse us on the monies we spend on the city grants. A little bit about Right to Counsel and how important that is to preserve. Over the last 8 years, Right to Counsel has been well established in New York City Housing Court, and studies show how effective it is in keeping people in their homes and also reducing the number of eviction filings in the city. The program has become more effective over time. This last year, it was reported that 89% of tenants who have lawyers remain in their home, and it just quickly, it also saves the city money by, I think we're aware, reducing the number of people that end up in shelter programs. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague.
Great, thank you, Roz. Good afternoon. I'm Philip Duncan. I'm the Assistant Director for Housing at Northern Manhattan Improvement Corporation. While NYC is a Right to Counsel provider, we also provide services through the Anti-Harassment Tenant Protection Program, or AHTP, which I'm here to talk about today. HTP plays a vital role in preserving affordable housing and ensuring housing justice for New York City tenants. While the Right to Counsel program offers legal representation for tenants facing eviction, HTP complements RTC by funding preventative and affirmative legal services. Together, these programs form a comprehensive safety net, but HTP is the only program that empowers lawyers and advocates to go on the offensive, proactively fighting with and for tenants to stop harassment before it escalates into eviction. HTP enables tenants to assert their rights in the face of landlord harassment and systemic housing neglect. It funds tenant-initiated litigation, allowing residents to hold landlords accountable for creating or allowing unsafe environments and for violating rent regulations. Additionally, AHTP provides vital support for tenant organizing. It protects groups of tenants who band together to form associations and take collective action against predatory landlords. It also equips them with the legal tools to challenge unlawful rent hikes, illegal deregulation of rent-stabilized apartments, and other forms of financial exploitation. Without this infrastructure of legal and community-based support, tenants, particularly low-income and immigrant communities, will be left to navigate these complex and often intimidating challenges alone. The program also plays a critical role in addressing systemic discrimination. It gives tenants the means to file complaints about housing discrimination based on race, disability, family status, and more, whether through administrative agencies like the City or State Commission on Human Rights or in state and federal courts. Furthermore, AHTP helps divert matters from housing court altogether through pre-litigation strategies and out-of-court negotiations. While this program relies on a smaller portion of federal funds than RTC, HRA has made earlier decisions to cut this much smaller pool of AHT funds to divert money to RTC. Right before the start of this fiscal year, HRA took funding from this critical program and reallocated it to RTC, a cut that this council fought hard to restore and did as part of the City of Yes. Preserving and expanding support for HDP is not just a matter of tenant rights. It's a necessary investment in the health, stability, and equity of New York City's housing system. So for the ways to protect funding for these programs, our suggestions is you coordinate with federal elected officials to gather information and advocate for continued funding, coordinate with state elected officials to explore other funding streams, elevate the importance of this funding through public discussions and media, and create a contingency plan for other resources and funding streams to bridge the funding gap. So thank you for this opportunity to discuss this incredible value provided by these programs for New York City tenants. We look forward to your continued support in protecting and enhancing our services.
Really appreciate the thoughtful testimony and your time today. Thank you for. Question from Councilmember Shulman.
I have a question. Does the private sector do any investment in anything that you guys do? I'm just curious. Because now is a time to figure out where we can get resources from.
In terms of investment, do you mean contributions and fundraising?
Anything in terms of partnering or anything like that, or anything maybe that the council can look into in that vein. So just asking, just putting it out there.
I would say for the center, we do have a mix of funding.
Mm-hmm.
We are looking into that a little bit more because we do have a majority of government grants, so it's something that we are exploring, and any support that we could get from the council would be very much welcome.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, and we do engage in fundraising. However, it's the volume of that is just not sufficient. We have a huge budget, and
absolutely.
The federal funding is crucial to making payroll. So
no, totally understood. I'm not saying in place of. I'm just saying if there's anything that we could do to supplement and complement what you do.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So NMIC, for other projects, I think there is more of a mix of public and private funding. For our housing project, we are almost entirely government funded. And I will say we administer a grant that is a private grant for rent assistance.
Mm-hmm.
So we are able to provide some help through that. We also administered an EFSP grant. That those funds were paused, and that was really, I think that grant, we were able to, it's a month or two of rent, but it's a month or two of rent that can be the vital thing at the end of a long eviction process to prevent an eviction. So those sorts of things, that was, paused, and that actually has been a real drawback, but we're trying to supplement that with, the small amount of funds that we get from a private
Understood.
grant.
Okay. No, thank you. I appreciate that.
Great.
Thank you so much. Our next panel will be Kate Tishus from Collective Public Affairs, Joni Billy from Power Play NYC, Yesenia Mata from La Colmena, and Emmy Basir from City Meals on Wheels. Following that panel, we'll have a hybrid panel including Christopher Leon Johnson in person and Janice Holt, Sierra Kraft, Mai Chang, and Andy Bowen all online. Thanks. Feel free to testify in whichever order you are also moved.
Good afternoon, chairs and council members. My name is Yesenia Mata, the executive director of La Colmena, an immigrant rights organization on Staten Island. Our mission is to empower the immigrant worker through education, culture, organizing, and economic development. And today, I am here with our nonprofit sisters from Staten Island. Earlier, you heard from Miranda, La Colmena's organizing coordinator, who at once was a volunteer to now being the leading organizer at La Colmena, empowering immigrant workers to advocate for themselves, and who through the support of La Colmena won her asylum case and is now a U.S. citizen. So I'm proud to see Miranda here today testifying. This is just an example of the important role that La Colmena plays in the lives of immigrant workers on Staten Island. As Miranda mentioned, we hold regular community sessions to hear directly from our community, and with the support of our trusted consultant attorneys, we hold consultations to provide accurate, reliable information. Too often, our community comes to us after encountering misinformation, especially online or through word of mouth. In some cases, community members have been misled by individuals claiming to be attorneys, claiming that they can offer a speedy citizenship process, going as far as creating fake USCIS documents and impersonating judges, which is completely insane, and we are afraid that it may increase. More recently, we've seen people arriving at our doors with deportation notices or unsure how to navigate the new immigrant registry requirements. And this is why I'm here to highlight the critical work we've been doing. We thank you for your support in the past, but we urge you to please continue protecting and expanding city funding for immigrant-serving organizations, especially in Staten Island. And to the point mentioned earlier about our Congress member Nicole Meletakis, there's no support that immigrant groups like La Colmena will receive from her. On the contrary, she keeps pushing her far-right and racist agenda. So this is why, if at a federal level we cannot be supported, then we know we can count on you. Please don't forget about La Colmena. Please don't forget about Staten Island. Thank you for your time and for your continued commitment to justice.
Thank you so much.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Brennan, Chair Ressler, and esteemed committee members. My name is Janae Billy, and I am honored to serve as the Senior Director of Strategic Partnerships and External Affairs at PowerPlay NYC. On behalf of our executive team, I want to express our sincere gratitude for your leadership and continued support of youth-serving organizations across the city. For 27 years, PowerPlay NYC has remained steadfast in its mission to empower girls, primarily BIPOC youth, from under-resourced communities through sports-based youth development. Each year, we serve over 1,000 youth across all 5 boroughs of New York City, helping them grow stronger physically, emotionally, and academically. Our free programs, offered in partnership with Title I schools and community-based organizations, serve as lifelines for many young people who would otherwise have no access to safe spaces for physical activity, mentorship, or leadership development. Play equity is at the heart of our theory of change. Research confirms that what we see every day, when girls, particularly Black and brown girls, have access to high-quality, trauma-informed, culturally relevant sport programs, they are more likely to thrive in school, graduate, pursue college, lead in confidence, and serve as change makers in their communities. Yet, when girls are not engaged by the age of 14, the door often closes for good. This moment is make or break, and PowerPlay stands in that gap. Unfortunately, a growing wave of anti-DEI rhetoric and policy at the federal level is threatening our ability and the ability of countless peer organizations to continue this critical work. Nearly half of PowerPlay's budget is supported by a federal grant. But the chilling effect of these directives is not limited to public dollars. Private funders are also following suit. In the past year alone, we've seen a foundation specifically supporting Black girls rescind a $25,000 pledge grant, citing a sudden and widespread pullback from their own funders. Corporate donors has halted DEI-driven giving. Foundations have quietly dismantled their equity commitments, and all of this has happened with no roadmap, no transparency, and no warning. We are navigating an increasingly volatile philanthropic landscape, not because our work is less effective or less needed, but because it's explicitly rooted in equity. Let me be clear, this is not just a funding crisis, it's a moral crisis. Efforts to defund or delegitimize DEI initiatives jeopardizes decades of progress made on behalf of marginalized communities. They send a dangerous message to our young people that their identities, experiences, and futures are political liabilities. Now more than ever, we need the City Council's partnership to sustain this work. Restoring and expanding local investment is not only vital to PowerPlay's operations, it is unequivocal statement that New York City will not waver in its commitment to equity, justice, and the well-being of its young people. We cannot afford to lose momentum. We cannot afford to lose another girl to the margins. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today and for your ongoing commitment to youth in New York City.
Hi, thank you, Chairs Ressler, Brandon, and members of the committee for the opportunity to testify today and for giving this crisis in federal funding the attention it deserves. My name is Emma Basir. I am the Senior Policy Associate at City Meals on Wheels, and I'd like to focus my comments today on the crisis in food insecurity among older adults and why the city must act to protect these programs to make sure that older homebound adults have access to food now more than ever. Federal threats to SNAP, Medicaid, the Emergency Food and Shelter Program, as many of our partners have cited today, as well as other programs, have plunged the sector and those who depend on it into uncertainty about what programs will remain open and the future of nutrition assistance. We've already heard directly from meal recipients that they're afraid their regular home-delivered meals will not continue or their SNAP benefits will be reduced or lost entirely. We know that without that one meal a day, hunger will increase dramatically, which would worsen an already severe crisis of food insecurity among older New Yorkers. As the city braces for federal cuts, we must prioritize those in most need for the resources we do have. Given the rapidly rising number of older New Yorkers and the years of disinvestment in aging programs, any further cuts to programs would be absolutely devastating to older New Yorkers. Home-delivered meals, for example, is a hugely impactful program. Our recent research showed that 87% of participants said that HDM allows them to remain in their homes. 85% said that it helps them to eat more healthy, and 81% said that they help them manage one or more of their health conditions. Investing in this program is a smart and effective way to support older New Yorkers who will deeply feel the impact of federal cuts. We urge the City Council to ensure that services in the city are maintained. The preliminary budget currently shows a $100 million cut in NYC Aging's budget. This would be absolutely unconscionable in the current federal climate. Moreover, funding for CFC must be baselined at $100 million because food insecurity has already been rising and will only continue to deepen without this line of defense. Now is a time to strengthen our safety net for older adults, not weaken it. As the council and the administration work to negotiate their priorities in response to this challenge to our safety net, we cannot lose sight of the needs of homebound older New Yorkers who experience hunger out of sight and behind closed doors. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kate Tiskus. I'm with Collective Public Affairs. Thank you, Chairs Brannon and Ressler, for the opportunity to talk about these really important issues. I'd actually like to begin by talking about an anecdote that some of my colleagues at La Colmena, who are with me with the Domestic Workers Empowerment Initiative, will know all about. We had a kickoff event on the stairs of City Hall where we brought a bunch of domestic workers to come meet counselors. It ended up being a terrifying event for almost everybody involved because they're migrants who were afraid that ICE would come to prevent their public participation from being fully safe for them. So we had to send ICE marshals before the event to scout out and make sure that there wasn't anybody in or near the steps, and then also to sort of walk folks out to make sure that they felt safe to involve themselves in public discourse. So, I found that to be really kind of a stunner in New York City, and I wanted to share that out. But in terms of federal funding and some of the issues that we're facing today, I also work with the Trans Equity Coalition, and I wanted to be really clear about the gun that got aimed directly at the face of healthcare providers in the first days of the federal administration. Many name brand providers who are institutions in the city, we're talking our Callan Lords, have already lost funding, and the executive order that came down literally day one, taking aim at healthcare and gender affirming care for anyone under the age of 19, has already resulted in large losses. The administration has made no secret that it intends to extend those cuts to gender affirming healthcare, by which they're kind of defining any healthcare for somebody who is gender nonconforming, trans, or non-binary. And also they're taking aim at Medicaid. And so lots of the clinics, including Health and Hospitals and Callan Lord that we're talking about, get up to 80% of their patient revenue and reimbursement from Medicaid. So without backing from City Council, they'd be facing closure within days or weeks when those cuts come down. So I wanted to back the City Council's courageous executive budget response, which already includes $15 million as a hoped-for fund for backing up gender affirming care for people under the age of 19. It also has $6 million in the executive budget response for 100 new beds for runaway and homeless LGBT youth, because as you can imagine, with things this bad in New York City, they're even worse elsewhere. And so we're already experiencing, my colleagues who are service providers are telling me, we're already experiencing an influx of people who are running here hoping to find some kind of shelter and solace. So The fear that there will just be a lack of access to basic healthcare is real, and Health and Hospitals in specific has been sort of the city leader. So we really appreciate their courage and your courage in backing them up. Thanks.
Thank you so much, and thank you to this great panel. We really appreciate your. Oh, sure.
Thank you. Sorry. So I just wanted to echo what you said. I'm chair of the Health Committee, and we've done not only in terms of funding, but legislation to make sure that records are not accessed, all of that. So we have that. We actually have a number of trans bills coming up in June for a hearing. So just so you're aware that I'm on. I'm working closely with Tiffany Caban. The other is that we did talk to the private hospitals, and some of them are doing it just quietly so that they don't get the federal government to come down on them and stuff. But there is one hospital, I'm not going to name it here, that was an issue, and so I've pulled my funding from there, and as has Councilmember Caban. So I just want you to know that we're doing stuff not just financially, but legislatively as well. So.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Schulman. And with that, we're going to call up our next panel. We really appreciate you all being with us today. We have Christopher Leon Johnson in person, and on Zoom we have Miss Janice Holt from the Central Harlem Senior Citizen Center, Sierra Kraft from the I Care Coalition, Mai Chang from AFI, from Asian Americans for Equality, and Andy Bowen, who I don't know if she still works for the Adams administration, but they have signed up to testify.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hello, Chairs Brannon and Chairs Ressler and Chair Shulman. My name is Christopher Leon Johnson. I'm here to testify, show my support to all these nonprofits here in the city of New York. I'm here to say this right now that, look, these nonprofits need to keep their funding, but I think that you're the chair of finance, Mr. Brannon. You have really control how that money get distributed through through the city, through the mayor's office. You should have introduce some bills to subpoena these members of the mayor's office to testify here. I don't know why they didn't show up, but everybody know why they didn't show up is because that Eric Adams is out the door. He's out. He don't care. He know he's done. You know, the next mayor is going to be Andrew Cuomo. I know I'm being political, and there's nothing that nobody here could do about it. I'm calling on the city council to sit down with the incoming Cuomo administration to fix this stuff. You know what I'm saying? Cuomo's going to get a lot of things done, and it is what it is. I believe that none of these nonprofits going to be cut with their funding. None of the social programs going to be cut with the funding. What need to start happening is the city council need to stop having these parties, these little pointless parties when they give out awards to in city hall chambers. They need to stop having this stuff. Not only they need to stop having that, they need to stop sponsoring these pointless parties, but all they do is they honor the people that get them to city council, into the state assembly and state senate. You stop the parties, you stop the nonsense. I think that's really nonsense, just having parties all day. Maybe this stuff will stop. You need to stop the backflips. I understand that these people get you to city council, but you could just give them an award just like that at their event. Why do you have to spend $100,000 for a Israel night, a Palestine night, a Bolivia night, Catholic night? Every night y'all honor every culture. Y'all spend $100,000 up to $1 million on these events. Stop spending money that way. Maybe this stuff will stop. And another thing is, as I said, we need to preserve the funding of all these nonprofits. I believe none of these nonprofits will be cut. Eric is done. Like I said, Eric don't give a crap no more what's going on in the city. He know he's done. He just doing it because he's trying to weaponize his mayor position, like these nonprofits, like the one that spoke here, like Lo Comena, to support him for mayor. If you don't support me for mayor, you're not gonna get what you want out of our budget. But everybody knows what's going on here. That's why he's running as an independent. But going forward, Mr. Brannon, you're one of the most powerful people in the city council. You should have made your poll like you always do with your other members here and subpoenaed the mayor, had the mayor bring his people here. And if they did it, they would cut your funding off. But like I said, you're running for controller, and everybody know you are. But if you really care about these people here, you could have easily done that, because you got you use a lot of them to do what you want them to do, but you couldn't get the mayor to do what you want him to do. Come on, man, like that's not right. You're running for controller, bro. All right. Thank you
very much for your testimony. And with that, we will shift to folks who are online. I can just call people out to keep it moving. Why don't we start with Ms. Holt, and we'll follow that with Ms. Kraft.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to testify today about the important issues of federal funding changes and their impact on New York City. My name is Janice Holt, and I'm on the Central Harlem Senior Citizen Board of Directors, as well as a senior at one of its centers. I appreciate the chance to speak to you before today and commend your leadership on issues that significantly affect human service organizations in New York City. Central Harlem Senior Citizen Center is a nonprofit organization with a $2.5 million budget dedicated to enhancing the healthy living of over 4,500 seniors in Harlem. We achieve this through education, socialization, and advocacy, while also working to uphold and affirm their dignity, self-worth, and pride in New York City. Federal funding plays a critical role in the operation of our city's essential services. Recent developments at the federal level suggest that we may face significant changes in the availability of these funds. The constantly shifting financial landscape raises concerns about city contracts that involve federal funding, particularly those affecting Central Harlem Senior Citizen Center and the Department for the Aging. Such changes could have serious consequences for the essential service and overall well-being of our seniors. It is important to recognize that federal funding supports our city in various areas, including human services, education, healthcare, housing, and transportation. Any restructuring or reduction of these funds would jeopardize the programs and services that many adults rely on. In recent years, fluctuations in federal support have strained our city's budget and impacted crucial service. Currently, the economic landscape in New York City is fragile, particularly as we recover from recent challenges. Any reduction of federal funding would impede our progress and threaten the stability of our essential programs. It is vital to examine the areas most at risk, such as community resources, including health service, meal support, transportation options, social activities, technology assistance, housing alternatives, financial support, and caregiver resources. These are crucial for helping senior age in place safely and independently. We must also consider how these changes will disproportionately affect our vulnerable population, especially our older adults in our city. I believe that New York State has explored various sources of revenue, such as increasing taxes or expanding economic activities. However, the challenges lies in the timeline and implementation of these alternatives. The immediate reduction in federal aid has led to significant shortfalls in these services, which cannot be as easily compensated for in the short term by alternative.
Time has expired.
That's it?
If you want to wrap up your sentence, or if there's one more,
Okay, cuts to the federal aid can result in inefficient allocations of the state resources for seniors and negatively impact critical services. It is essential to evaluate both short-term and long-term impacts on seniors, especially those who depend heavily on these services. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify about the important issues of federal funding and their impact on the New York City seniors.
Thank you so much, Ms. Halton, for your advocacy for Harlem seniors. Next up, Ms. Kraft, followed by Mai Chang.
You may begin.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Ressler and Chair Brannon. Thank you for holding this oversight hearing and the opportunity to provide testimony. My name is Sierra Kraft, and I'm the Executive Director of the Eye Care Coalition. We're a citywide collaborative of legal service providers working to ensure that unaccompanied immigrant children in New York City have access to free legal representation. I'm here to speak about the devastating fallout from the near total termination of the federal unaccompanied children program. Almost all of the federal support for legal screenings, representation, and court support for unaccompanied children in ORR custody was eliminated. And the consequences here in New York are immediate, severe, and still unfolding. In New York City alone, that's more than 1,100 children with open immigration cases that lost legal access services overnight. These are young people who already are living in our communities, attending school, rebuilding their lives, and trying to recover from the trauma they've experienced. Most are living in Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx, and now they're being forced through complex deportation proceedings without a lawyer, often without understanding what's being asked of them. So statewide, the cuts amount to nearly $18 million lost in funding. And in New York City specifically, that is about $14 million to legal service providers. The funding supported more than 26,000 children nationally and nearly 8,000 here in New York City. And many of these organizations have spent decades doing the work, building trust and expertise. And some of the providers have already begun staff layoffs. Others are still struggling to decide whether they can keep the programs running at all. And even with no funding, many providers are still representing children because ethically they can't just walk away from these children. Staff are working around the clock and supporting cases pro bono, but it's definitely not sustainable. The legal ecosystem that's been established is going to be dismantled if we don't act. And all of this is happening as the climate for immigrant youth is continuing to grow more hostile. Children are telling us they no longer feel safe. They've become enforcement priorities under the new federal guidance, and ICE is conducting home visits and what they call wellness checks at sponsor homes across the city. We can't normalize this, and we can't keep expecting frontline providers to shoulder this burden with no funding, no relief, and no plan. These kids are being sent back to danger, not because they don't qualify for protection, but we failed to give them access to the legal support that could save their lives. Without an attorney, their chance of remaining safely in the US is over 90%, and without one, that drops below 15%. These are our kids, they're living in our neighborhoods, and they're New York's responsibility, and we're failing them if we don't act. We can't wait for someone else to fix this, so we are urging Council to provide emergency funding now and to increase support for eye care providers through the Unaccompanied Minors and Families initiatives. Our request is $6.297 million, and this funding is essential to stabilize the city's legal services and to ensure immigrant children don't fall through the cracks. This isn't just about legal access, it's about dignity, safety, and stability. Thank you for your time and leadership.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kraft, and for your critical advocacy for immigrants and immigrant youth and immigrants in need of legal services. With that, Mai Chang from AFI.
You may begin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Brandon, Chair Ressler, and members of the committee. I'm Mai Chang. I'm the Chief of Staff of Asian Americans for Equality. I'd like to thank the Council for your support of so many of AFI's programs that range from access to health benefits to affordable housing and small business services that serve over 35,000 people a year. As you know, the folks who use our programs face growing hardship as the resources they rely on are cut. As providers, we're also concerned about the sustainability of our programs, and I'll highlight a few of the impacts that we're seeing. AFI operates 3 food pantries, and in fiscal year 24, 5,280 households participated in our food pantries, where we distributed 79,000 pounds of food. The need's always been greater than what we've been able to provide, but recently we've been asked by one of our funders to halt spending due to the uncertainty of reimbursement. We had also planned for a new pantry that was to begin distribution this month, but it was canceled when our partner informed us that there's no longer funding for it. In our small business work, where last fiscal year we canceled over 1,200 clients, made 144 loans, and dispersed $9.6 million, we rely on grants from SBA and U.S. Treasury's CDFI fund. We've seen the administration slash employment at SBA and eliminate the CDFI fund. As you know, small businesses have suffered from a series of hardships from the COVID pandemic and hybrid or remote work, and now they face potential impacts of tariffs. More than ever, we need the resources to support small businesses who are unable to access capital from traditional financial institutions. And we'd like to thank the Speaker for her support of AFI through the creation of the city's CDFI fund. We're committed to fighting to continue these services for small businesses. In our 1,000-unit portfolio of affordable housing that ranges from Chinatown on the Lower East Side to Flushing, Bay Ridge, Chelsea, and Harlem, proposed federal cuts to Section 8 and STAT benefits are going to have detrimental effects to families having to choose between buying food and paying rent. Affected families are going to face hardship, and reduced rent collection also means financial hardship for the buildings that then will not have the resources to be maintained. And finally, we're going to face challenges in building new affordable housing projects, and we have some in the pipeline in Crown Heights and the Far Rockaways as well. And it'll be challenging to move those forward when we're looking at potentially major cuts in Section 8 and where there's uncertainty in federal pass-through funding for other resources as well. And then we're looking at uncertainty in the cost of materials. Nonprofit developers pay for these risks in the form of higher borrowing costs, and we guarantee all of the cost overruns for projects. So a single bad project can bankrupt almost any nonprofit, and that's the risk that all nonprofit developers are facing right now. Thank you so much for your support of organizations like ours and the opportunity to provide testimony during such a crucial time for New Yorkers.
Thank you so much, and we very truly appreciate the amazing work that AFI does day in and day out, year in and year out. So thank you for being with us and for your hard work and for your insightful testimony. And last up for today's hearing is Andy Bowen.
You may begin.
Hi, Andy Bowen here. I haven't worked for the Adams administration for 5 whole days now, and I'm reporting for duty to my comrades. Thanks for taking me late. Thank you to Council, Chairs Ressler and Brandon, Councilmember Schulman, for this hearing and fire budget response, acknowledging the unprecedented nightmare of these cuts. Just for a little bit of background, I'm 3 days into my new thing, which is starting a new organization called the Popular Front Project, which is a trans-led organization dedicated to fighting the fascist destruction of social, medical, and other material resources that our vulnerable communities need to survive and thrive. I'd say the lack of urgency from blue government bodies nationwide, but also the state government, yourselves excluded, is morally appalling. For anyone who's we need to wait for the shoe to drop, which I've heard from some areas, the shoe dropped. The weekend of January 31st, letters were given to our nonprofit providers saying your federal funding streams will be cut. So I don't know why anyone waits. So again, thank you for getting the moral moment. And again, it doesn't appear that any body in Albany is prioritizing. And so, I appreciate you all for taking this on because even if there is there's probably no way for city and state government to fully cover the gap that's going to exist. But council and city hall need to get caught trying. Something's better than nothing. We need to have precedents for other cities and states to follow. And I'm going to say, council members, I would love to know, and this is maybe an offline conversation, how you can use your power to aggressively advocate beyond what I'm sure you've done with your powers in the governor's office and state legislature. Because the idea that a contingency fund for queer orgs and others would be a dead letter right now in the budget is, again, morally appalling. A couple last things. It's not lost on anyone that while NYU, Langone, and Mount Sinai canceled their gender affirming care appointments last month, H&H never did. So what I'm saying is people showing bravery really matters. We're seeing that now with Harvard. Harvard said no, and suddenly a bunch of universities who were capitulating to Trump were what? On that point, getting to other institutions being brave, I want to give a shout out to Councilmember Schulman insofar as the comment about we got to reach out to rich people. And again, this is a call to council members, happy to talk offline. We have to organize the rich between supporting tax increases, massive private giving, it's that plus government funds, plus changing the nature of our government to actually be high tax and high service is the way out. I hate to be glib, but at this point we're kind of reliant. Okay. One last thing. We're kind of reliant on the hyper wealthy to backstop civil society. So we just need to create a new we need to rethink the public sector and get these folks on board who actually have the money also. All right.
Thank you so much for the testimony today and for being with us. Congrats on your new endeavor. With that, we will adjourn the hearing. I want to thank everyone for their testimony and for their time and look forward to working together to fight back against the chaos and cuts that are coming out of Washington.